She dismissed him almost immediately, pushing him out of her thoughts as if he'd never mattered. David, meanwhile, stole a quick glance at the instructor. Only when he saw she wasn't watching him did he finally let out the breath he'd been half-holding. Then something strange hit him. He wasn't sure if it was real or just his imagination, but his body felt lighter. His muscles, too. Like the soreness had eased by a fraction and strength had quietly replaced it. David didn't dare to trust it without testing. He muttered to himself for a second, then shoved the feeling into the back of his mind. Thinking too much always punished him with a headache. And work, mental or physical, had never been his favorite hobby. Laziness wasn't something he tried to hide. It was part of him. So he stopped analyzing and forced himself to listen. Instructor Arella stepped forward, her expression sharp and impatient. "Now that you've all passed initiation, I'll explain the basics," she said. "I'm not your science teacher, so I'll keep it simple and fast." Her gaze swept over the students like a blade. "And I'm warning you now, keep quiet. Do not interrupt me. If you do, that will be the end of today's lecture." The threat wasn't in her words alone. It was in the way she said them, as if she truly wouldn't hesitate. "As you're feeling right now," Arella continued after a pause, "it comes from the special object transplanted into your bodies." She deliberately called it an object, not a modified foreign organ engineered by the Genetic Association. If she told them the truth, half of them would panic, the other half would get sick, and the lab would turn into chaos. Calling it an object was cleaner, safer. The students started to stir, ready to whisper to each other. Adella's face hardened. She stomped. Bang! The floor cratered under her foot, a ditch nearly a meter wide forming instantly as dust burst into the air. The shock of it made several students flinch backward. The sudden violence, the raw control, stole every voice in the room. Silence. Arella nodded, satisfied, and continued as if nothing had happened. "As I said, that object can make you an ultimate expert if you play your cards right." She paused, staring straight into their eyes, measuring them. "It strengthens your body. But how much it strengthens you depends on one thing: blood circulation. A normal human can only push their blood through the body about 3 times in 1 minute at peak condition. That's the ceiling." Her voice rose slightly, pulling them in. "But you're no longer normal. With special training methods, you can increase your blood circulation. And the higher the circulation, the stronger you become." She leaned for a fraction. "Now think. If you could circulate your blood 1,000 times in 1 minute, how strong would you be?" The students' faces changed instantly. Eyes widened. Breathing quickened. Hearts started hammering like they'd been struck with adrenaline. Even David felt it. His pulse sped up on its own, excitement cutting through the fog. 1,000 times? That sounded ridiculous, and yet the crater in the ground was real. Arella lowered her voice, and it turned strangely captivating, like it carried a rhythm meant to guide their bodies. "Feel your heartbeat quicken." David's eyes closed without him meaning to. His heart thumped loudly in his chest. "Feel your blood moving through your veins." He could sense it faintly, warm pressure sliding through pathways under his skin. "Feel it cleanse you, strengthen you, temper you. Remember that power." The moment her words settled, David felt it again. Lighter, stronger. His muscles tightened with clean responsiveness. His bones felt less stiff, like something inside him had loosened a lock. For a brief second, he felt as if he could command every part of his body with precision. A finger, a calf, a shoulder, a twitch at will. That alone was terrifying. But not everyone was buying it. A few students stayed stiff-faced, unimpressed, eyes narrowed with suspicion. 1,000 circulations in a minute? That was basically one person carrying the strength of 1,000. If humans could really do that, they would have wiped out the REBs long ago. They wouldn't be hiding behind strongholds and borders. And the logic didn't lie. To survive that kind of speed, veins would need to be tougher than steel. A heart would need to be stronger than titanium. The heat and friction alone would cook someone from the inside. Even the sound of a heartbeat that violent might burst eardrums and shake bones. Someone with 1,000 circulations wouldn't be a soldier. They'd be a god. And gods didn't exist. Not here. Not anywhere. So those students watched Ella with guarded eyes, convinced she was doing what instructors always did in desperate times, dangling impossible hope, making them crave a peak they would never reach. And as for you, Instructor Ella turned her head toward the far side of the training ground. A lone girl stood there, separated from the crowd like she'd been placed on the wrong layer of reality. She looked about 17. Light brown skin, brown hair, black eyes. Her figure was ordinary, the kind you'd forget in a crowd. She wasn't ugly, but calling her pretty would be stretching it. What stood out wasn't her face. It was her eyes. They were dull, empty, not sleepy or calm, just lifeless. If someone put a human-sized doll beside her and told you to pick the real person based only on the eyes, you might genuinely choose the doll, because the doll would look more alive. Everyone else had moved when Ella directed them. Everyone else had reacted, even if only slightly. This girl hadn't. That could only mean one thing. She hadn't felt the change Ella described. Not even a hint. No lightness. No strengthening. Nothing at all. Ella tapped her wrist, and a faint glow reflected in her glasses as her AI ran through the results. She had already scanned the students for failures. Only one profile had flagged. Her. Ella's gaze settled on the girl like a blade resting on a throat. As for you, she said flatly, you'll receive a direct message. Follow the instructions exactly. She paused. If your body can't accept the changes within a week, don't let me see you here again. Leave as soon as possible. No threat. No drama. Just a sentence that sounded like a verdict. Ella turned back to the others, as if the girl was already done and dusted. But David's eyes had moved on their own. He stared at the girl without understanding why. Her face was plain. Her posture was still. Her expression was deadpan, almost as intimidating as Ella's. And yet David couldn't look away. It made no sense. She wasn't his type. Not even close. But his heartbeat picked up anyway, fast and stupid, like his body had decided for him. His gaze traced her features inch by inch, as if staring hard enough would reveal what he was missing. Then the girl's eyes shifted, just slightly. She glanced toward him from the corner of her eye. Their gazes met. David's heart lurched. His blood surged, so hard he felt it in his throat. Her indifferent stare collided with his intense one, and for a split second, he felt like he could drown in her eyes and be satisfied doing it. She held that eye contact for less than half a second. Then she looked away, not embarrassed, not annoyed, not even interested. If she felt anything, it didn't reach her face. Her heartbeat didn't change. Her expression didn't move. David had sparked her curiosity for a blink, and then she discarded the thought like it was dust on her sleeve. Because she wasn't here for people. She was here for power, for resources, for whatever the Institute offered to those with talent. When she had registered, she'd given only the basics: name, age, sex, address, unknown, family, unknown, background, unknown, everything else blank, a mystery wrapped in a file. Even earlier, when Ella had demonstrated power and pressure, the girl hadn't flinched once. Her dull gaze hadn't rippled. That meant either she'd seen through it, or she had a method to protect herself, or she simply didn't care whether she lived. None of those options were comforting. The girl lowered her head slightly, eyes closing for the first time. A tiny crease formed between her brows, like a bad memory had surfaced, and then her heart thumped. Hard. Once. Twice. Faster. The air around her felt different, like something invisible had finally clicked into place. Her blood circulation spiked. The foreign object inside her body accepted her, merged. Ella was still speaking to the students when she suddenly paused mid-sentence, sensing something off. She adjusted her glasses and looked back. Her AI scan flickered across her lenses. Vital signs, heart rate, circulation, confirmation. Ella's expression shifted from irritation to genuine surprise. "What did you say your name was?" she asked, one eyebrow lifting. For the first time, the instructor looked almost human. The girl raised her head, stared at Ella with that wooden expression, then finally answered. "Lister." Her voice was slightly raspy, young, and flat, but it carried weight. as if that single name came with a history no one in this room could afford to ignore.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
What did you say your name was? The instructor asked the young lady with raised eyebrows. Looking quite cute, the young lady glanced at the instructor with a wooden expression for a second before she finally gave in. Lister, a slightly raspy voice of a young girl rang out. Lister replied back to the instructor. In that moment, David's heart skipped a bit as he mumbled his name over and over again while still watching her with his fiery gaze, as if he couldn't wait to eat her up. Lister on. Biam nodded her head. All right, come over here, join the line with the rest of the students. She waved her hand over to Lister, ordering for her to come over. Everyone stared at her before completely losing interest. She was neither as beautiful as the goddess of an instructor from across them, nor was she as sexy as she was. She was just like your typical plain, normal, introverted, high school girl. Except this wasn't high school. All but a few students kept their eyes trained on Lister as she walked over. They were wearing various expressions, and the one that seemed to be common was the countenance of surprise on their faces, while David's look was especially queer. They had received quite a bit of information about the instructor from different sources and are well aware she disdained asking the students who had no potential or talents their names. That was why they had various looks in their faces. The instructor felt that it was a pointless endeavor to spend worthless time and resources on those who have no potential nor talents. David watched as she walked towards the line with infatuation. It was only the moment she had joined with the line, whereby his vision was been obstructed by the other students, did he finally came back to his senses. He immediately shivered. Wow, what just happened? Dav was filled with bewilderment. He was almost unable to get out of his trance. If his gaze hadn't been obstructed, he didn't even know what might happen. He didn't dare think it either. He could guess his hormones were catching up to him. While he wasn't a loner in his previous life, he was still a virgin before he died. And in this lifetime, too, he still remained a virgin. One could infer from the information that the hormones from 2 lifetimes of virginity isn't something a young boy could handle. He could barely hold himself back from going up to her. Calming his thoughts down, he finally had an idea of Nihia feelings for Phillida. Yeah, that was embarrassing. Taking a deep breath, he swore never to look at that girl called Lister in the face again. Instructor Ella adjusted her glasses, clearing her throat. The state you all are facing is called SPRYH. Spry literally means full of life and energy, because in this state, one's body can be continuously filled with energy with the surge of your blood, and the numbers of circulation one can make continuously without any limitations. Well, that's all theory, though. While we call those who are in that state spryers, the instructor explained. Now that we got that over with, I should give time to digest the information as we don't know the dumb ones among you, but due to some complications, we will have to continue. Instructor Ella, day after day. It's all up to you if you to practice all by yourself to get stronger at a more faster pace. The instructor smirked as if she thought of something, but then she sighed. Since some of you deem it fit to ignore reading the student's guide given to you, I would just go out of my way to inform you. Freshmen are entitled to choose techniques from the Institute. You can exchange other techniques with gyno points. The students were a bit surprised, one part due to the fact that they weren't aware of it. But another part was due to her reminder, including David. He was also surprised, but it was mainly due to the instructor's reminder. He had scrolled through the student's guide. He was already aware of such information. He was already aware of the instructor's behavior by now, and he knew she wasn't the type to go out of her way and remind them of the techniques, since they were the one at fault because they had refused to read the guide. But he really didn't know what they were for. Now look around you. Ella instructed. David obeyed, and what he saw was absolutely nothing. Just an empty field that was as large as a football field. He was confused as he looked back to the instructor in puzzlement. Just run 50 rounds around the edges of the field, and I can leave here from this place. I'm already tired from all this. Instructor Ella sighed, while her beautiful face dropped, appearing quite beautiful. The boys unconsciously raised their hands, wanting to protect her, while their hearts clenched and their frown deepened, appearing quite pained. If David hadn't met Lister yet, he wasn't completely sure if he wouldn't act just like the other boys did. But the boys soon woke up from their trance as soon as her words registered in their brain. 50 rounds. How is that even possible? The students' eyes bulged while they all shouted out in disbelief, while some let out a casual laugh as though the instructor was joking. David just blinked his eyes as he also thought the instructor was joking. But reality was cruel to them because the instructor's face remained stoic. The meaning was all clear to them. Her expression clearly stated that she was serious. The last one still standing after 3 seconds would be forced to take one punch of mine. Although she said that, her face was serene. The students didn't need to be told twice, and David wasn't one to joke with his life either. He began running instantly. 1 punch of yours? I'm not ready to die yet. While he thought that, he wasn't slow in his actions as he picked up speed, as swift as swallow. David had almost reached the 4th lap before he started to reach his limit. His was gasping out loudly while jogging. His legs had mostly turned into jelly since couldn't even feel his legs, but were pouring out like rain from his body, almost forming a pool below him. When he was about to reach his absolute limit, did he start to notice something was extremely weird. Something isn't right, David muttered. Although he couldn't say he was 100% familiar with his body, he was at least 50% familiar with it, which was why it was when he had almost reached his limits, did he actually notice that something was weird with his body. Because he had also almost reached his limits about 2 laps ago, but he had never truly reached it. This time, he focused his mind completely to observe what was happening to him. He continued running for a while, when he was just about to fall down due to the weakness of his legs when something caught his attention. "Ah!" David suddenly exclaimed. That was due to the fact that his heartbeat suddenly increased. And although he hadn't had enough time to measure it, he was sure his blood circulation had long since surpassed 3 revolutions per minute. Energy surged into his body, but it was very minuscule, and if he wasn't already monitoring his own situation, he wouldn't even notice anything at all. Seems like the instructor was right. The more heart pumping an exercise is, the more stronger one would become, he concluded. He looked around and noticed that only few of the other students seemed to have also come into the same conclusion as he had since they suddenly picked up speed. But David was different, though. He is lazy at heart, and anything relating to work was everything he hated. Why would he waste his strength to run when he was clear at his limits to get stronger? What for? He had already long since discarded his dreams of ruling the world and tearing down every single library in the world. He was about to collapse to the ground, just like this one black-haired student who had long since collapsed to the ground due to his weak willpower. But as he was about to give up, a whiff of the fragrance of the mixture between forest and something slightly metallic, just like iron, blew past his nose. David, uncontrollable, closed his eyes while taking in a deep breath. It appeared that he was drunk on that scent as he wobbled on his feet like a drunk. He only opened his eyes when he realized that the whiff was almost gone. He was stunned by what he saw: the black dress, light brown skin, black hair, crystalline drop of sweat ran down her back from her neck. "It is her," David almost screamed in his mind. It was Lister who had passed right beside David while jogging at a fast pace. She was almost out of his line of sight when energy rushed into his body, and without waiting for nobody, he swiftly picked up speed in that moment. He had already made up his mind to catch up to her, and least say hi. He ran, hit tired, filled with energy, picked up speed again, slowed down due to tiredness, felt refreshed, felt sore again. It was a continued cycle. David didn't know how much he ran, but all he knew was that he was almost about to catch up to the figure. He was just 10 meters away from her when she seemed to slow down her pace. Frenzied, David picked up speed again. He was about 2 meters away, but energy seemed to have faded from his body. He was really tired. He tried moving his legs, but he could only move them by inch. He subconsciously tried to reach the young lady across-eyed him, but he couldn't even feel them. It only moved a bit before they instantly fell down back to their previous position. If David had the time to sense the changes in his body, he would be mostly shocked. His heart was reverberating through his chest, attempting to burst out of them, His blood revolved along his blood vessels, sounding like that of a flowing tap water. Meanwhile, his Vien's body were worn out and were ready to test through the first amount of friction the bloody revolutions had caused. If he continued, it was highly likely that his blood vessels and veins would end up tearing in different locations due to them being already worn out. When he was just a few feet from her, a loud and sexy voice immediately reverberated through his head. "Stop!" David's head buzzed. He suddenly felt dizzy and lightheaded as he broke out of his infatuation. His eyes met Lister's because she had turned her head back, but when she saw him, although her stoic face and dull gaze didn't change, her eyebrows still rose up in slight surprise as she saw through the young boy. He has been following her closely for a while now, when he was clearly at his limits. His willpower and resilience is above average. That was her only thought. David's sight darkened soon after as he dropped to the ground, unconscious. But before that, he mumbled out something beautiful. Lister froze in her tracks and observed him for more than a second this time. But that was all, since all she did after that was to turn back and continue jogging, resuming her assignment. It was unknown when, but Instructor Ella was already crouching beside David as she scanned his vitals to make sure he was all right. When she checked, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Such willpower, although not that rare, was commendable. She didn't want to lose such hard-working students, since the foreign organ could deteriorate when it was overworked. But he is clearly okay. The results showed that he was worn out, needed more rest, and more importantly, more energy. She thought for a while, having thought of something troublesome, we'll just dump them in an energy pod. They would have to pay up once they woke up. Having thought up to here, she picked David up by the collar together with 7 other students. She spoke up to the few students who were still standing in a clear voice. "When you all are done with the exercise, you can then leave. See you in whenever." With a single thought, she called forth her pink sky cruiser, which was over her head in just at the amount of time the eyeball takes to roll. Stomping her foot, she was instantly catapulted through the air towards the open cockpit, passing through the entrance with a perfect arc. The 2 thrusters by the sky cruiser instantly trembled as if storing energy. With a whoosh, large amounts of heat burst out simultaneously, sending the sky cruiser reeling forwards at an immense speed, leaving behind clouds of warm air. Opening his eyes, breathing out heavily, he had to admit, though, that was the most satisfying sleep he had had since he transmigrated. He was about to roll over, so as to sleep more. His body seemed incredibly heavy. Opening his eyes to check what was wrong, his vision was incredibly blurry and was stained with a tinge of blue in them. His drowsiness was instantly cleared as though someone poured cold water on his body. His mind swiftly cleared as his body relaxed, and his heartbeat began to get heavy. Upon this, he tried to inspect his surroundings more carefully. When he inspected his surroundings, David froze in shock. That was because he is currently submerged inside a transparent fluid that had a tinge of blue in them. It was as if the fluid was previously blue and then it had been absorbed by something. He was quick to realize the reason why his vision was stained with a blue color. But the fluid was almost clear and he could see far. It was when he focused his eyes adeptly did he realize adequately where he was. He was situated inside of a tank, floating freely inside the tank which contains the blue fluid. He looked around whilst he was still submerged in the fluid. He saw that he was in some kind of a laboratory, and that laboratory was filled with hundreds of tanks. They were almost 5 meters in height. Meanwhile, the tanks also contains the same blue fluid, but some were more concentrated than the other and more concentrated than the one David was currently in. The tanks seemed to have different rows of tubes connected to them. The tanks were arranged systematically to fit themselves side by side, leaving only a slight space in the middle to walk on. There is almost at least 100 pieces of tanks arranged to fit perfectly in the wide space. What the? David was thoroughly confused as to why he was currently submerged in a liquid. He thought back to the last thing he was doing before he woke up. As he went deep in thought, his eyes instantly glazed over, but his expression was that of one who was smiling, shaking his head to get rid of the thought as his rationality came back. "I think I need to avoid that girl at all costs, don't I?" David muttered, but all that came out of his mouth was only bubble. Flapping his hands, David's head came out of the liquid. He could see more clearly now, and he saw that he was right about the large hall. It was a laboratory. He raised himself to step out the tank with the descending stairs that was connected to every tank's. Stretching his body, popping sounds rang out of his body, rumbling lowly like that of a muffled thunder. He noticed that he was naked, but his attention was caught up by something else entirely. Looking down at his hands, he clenched his fist tightly. The air seemed to howl at the sudden clench of his fists. He felt his body was filled with massive strength that wasn't there before. His movements appeared sleek, agile, and more graceful, almost like that of a trained panther. His blood flowed in his body, similar to a surging pond raised by the winds. His heart pounded ferociously in his chest, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, he felt that it was exactly how it was supposed to be, or maybe even stronger. His skin and muscles appeared to be more toned than it previously was. When he touched his skin, it felt almost like leather, but not that hard though. A simple paper cut would be unable to scratch his skin. Smiling widely, with a light tap of his feet, he jumped down from the tip of the 5 meters long tank, not bothering to take the descending stairs. Instead of the normally loud sound of his body hitting the floor, with a light thump, he landed with the grace of a skillful feline with his legs slightly bent, no broken bones or any complications. Upon witnessing that he possesses such, he abruptly burst into laughter like a madman while holding his stomach. He was both blissful and delighted. His heart couldn't help but be filled with pride. His laughter was loud, wild, and brazen. Ha 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 ha! Ha ha ha! Keep it down, boy, or shall I do that for you? A raspy voice, appearing to be that of an old man, rang out amidst his frenzied laughter. David's laughter was swiftly cut short by the voice. He couldn't help but turn his head around, towards the entrance of the hall, where he appeared to hear the voice. He saw an old man sitting behind a desk that looks quite old and antique, and most definitely going to be very expensive. The old man was on the verge of reading a report judging by the holographic sheet he was currently holding, when he was interrupted by the sudden laughter that came from David. Beside the old man was a group consisting of 14 people, standing equally at both sides of the old man's desk. They were dressed in a neat white coat, while standing quietly with their heads lowered. But they are currently glaring daggers at the naked David. Seeing as the group of people who were just a few years older than him dared to glare at him, he just rolled his eyes. Apparently, he was in a good mood, so he would let it slide just this once. There is no need for that, old man. I would just leave right now, David said casually as he turned around to pick up the blue robe hanging by the sides of the tank. He swiftly took the blue robes casually, while putting them on gracefully. Sighing out audibly in happiness, he turned to leave the lab. But what David was unaware of was that the moment he said the word Oldman, the group of interns momentarily drew in a muffled gasp of cold air. Muffled because they had quickly suppressed their mouths with their hands. They glanced at each other while trying to hide their astonishment. It was a well-known fact in the Institute that the professor disliked people calling him an old man. The old man's eyebrows furrowed when he heard the words too. He gazed at the now smiling David, who was currently about to leave the entrance. It appeared as if he really didn't like being called an old man, and by a junior at that. It wasn't that he doesn't like called an old man. In fact, it had nothing to do with it. The problem was that he really was an old man. Extreme power comes together with an extreme price. After passing through the stage of SBRYH, the higher one's amount of blood revolutions are, the more possibilities one has in incorporating with a powerful gene. Although it also has something to do with how long one could persist in the adrenaline state. But that isn't the main ground for advancement. The white-haired man was a 4-star talented individual back when he was still a student of the Institute. He had advanced from the SBRYH state at the 299th blood revolutions. He was undefeated by his peers and was also the most talented students among his peers. His confidence came from the fact that he could remain in the state of adrenaline twice the amount of his peers. Because of his confidence, he had chosen to develop and incorporate with a powerful gene that had the requirements of a 300th blood revolution sprier. Because of his decision, he had been admonished and counseled by the head of the institutes, and also the instructors tried dissuading him. Because the consequences of merging with a powerful gene when one's body is clearly not prepared for it, nor strong enough to control it, one might just lose control. He was aware of this fact, but he remained firm in his decision. According to his calculations back then, he had a 10% chances of dying, 30% chances of transforming into a mutant, and a 60% chance of survival. In the end, he successfully developed and also successfully merged with the gene, but not without an extreme side effect. Although he merged with the gene successfully, it still took a toll on his body, with a considerable side effect, hence his white hair and eyebrow. He almost failed, though, at the critical moment, as the duration of his adrenaline was a second and a half late than his calculations due to him merging with the gene. The powerful gene sucked a bit of his life energy as fuel since his body had no energy to provide, making his face look slightly wrinkled and rough. So at first glance, he appeared to be an old man. Although he was like an old man, he was one of the strongest professors of the Institute. One could infer from that fact that it was worth it to gain the power he currently had. If he was asked to make the decision again, he would still choose to merge with the gene. But if one looked closely, one would see his true appearance clearly. It was just that his face was a bit rough. The professor's flashback was interrupted when one of the interns by his side quickly spoke out before David had the opportunity to step out. "Wait, you haven't paid for occupying an energy tank yet." Upon hearing this, David's smiling expression dropped slightly. He tilted his head to the side slightly. "Are you referring to me?" David asked while pointing at himself. The intern who spoke up was a young man who looked to be 19 years of age. He had a light brown hair with a buzz cut as his hairstyle. A very handsome face with a slightly wide smile on it. But instead of making David comfortable, the smile hid a malicious intent which David had sensed since the moment the voice sounded out. David's body currently appeared to be relaxed, while his muscles hardened, akin to that of a tempered steel. But before his body could complete the transformation, he quickly put a stop to it, because at this moment he was completely filled with absolute confidence. He believed that with his current strength, he could handle any of his peers at the moment. If it was before, he wouldn't be able to stop his natural instincts toward a strong being, because he had tried previously, but it was to no avail. But now, he had grown slight stronger, and it appears his contract over his body appears to be more refined. The young man's smile dropped as his face hardened when he heard David's reply. He stride towards David with slow but heavy steps. "Yes, I was referring to you," he said, while stopping a meter away from him, glaring at David, face to face. "Oh, is that so? But how can I pay for something I know nothing about? I don't know what energy tank you're talking about, and I sure as hell do not remember coming into this place. So, whosoever has brought me here is the one to pay," David retorted with a wide smile and an innocent face before taking his leave. He was happy about his rapid increase in strength already, so he wasn't about to let a random nobody ruin his good mood. The blond boy was stunned slightly, as he had never heard anyone speak such shameless words with an air of righteousness. "You clearly gained a lot from the energy tank, judging by your laugh of happiness, but you are refusing to pay." As he thought of this, his face twisted in anger, and as the blond boy was to speak out, he sensed the old man gazing at him with the corner of his eyes. So he quickly kept his mouth shut, went back to standing respectfully by the professor's side, but not without shooting a glare at the shameless David. Laughing softly, David turned around to leave through the exit for the second time, before he was stopped again to pay for the whatever tank. But reality was cruel as a slightly raspy voice rang out of the hall. As he was about to exit the hall, he heard the same familiar raspy voice that had spoken out earlier. "What's your name, boy?" Sighing softly to himself, he had to contain his rising anger. "I just want to leave this place to test my strength. Is that too much to ask?" David thought while turning around. He didn't want to appear disrespectful, so he answered the old man patiently. "I'm David. You can also call me DAV. Can I leave now?" He was already getting impatient with these people. The old man behind the desk leaned backwards in his chair. He scanned David from head to toe. Ignoring his question, the man spoke up after a while. "All right, DAV. It has been a very long time since someone dared to call me old man. You must be a new student, right? The old man spoke up indifferently. Before waiting for David's reply, the prof spoke out once more. The tank you jumped out from is called an energy tank. And to use an energy tank, there have to be a payment of 50 gyno points for each usage. After saying all this, the prof went back to viewing the holographic report he was previously inspecting, ignoring the stunned David. Normally, to use the energy tank, one has to pay 50 gyno points to utilize a low-grade energy tank. Energy tanks are graded by the amount of purity included in them. A low-grade energy tank contains a high amount of impurities in them, almost taking up 50% of the energy tank, which are harmful to one's body in progress, but they also contain 50% of energy in them. Too much impurities could shorten the time for one to lose control. It means it could lead to one losing control at a more faster speed. David's smiling expression had long since turned blank in that moment. Although he might seem as if he doesn't care much about things, he still knew what 50 gyno points are worth, and he knew they were worth a lot. Since the school gave he only 100 gyno points. Now, the old man was telling him he had to pay half of the gyno points given to him by the Institute for something he doesn't know about. Fine, he gained a lot from soaking in the energy tank, but the main theme here is he didn't want to soak in there himself, and neither did he implore anyone to place him there. So, it technicality wasn't his fault. Thinking up to here, he turned around slowly to face the old man's desk. His formerly confident attitude had home through a 360-degree change. Sir, since I didn't come here myself, I clearly didn't ask to be out here. So technically, it isn't my price to pay, am I right, sir? David said, while smiling politely at the old man. Upon seeing the clear changes in David's attitude, the interns couldn't help but blink their eyes rapidly in surprise. The blonde-haired guy wasn't even surprised at the change. He had already expected something like that from the shameless young man. He only wanted David to quickly step out of the hall. Once outside the hall, he couldn't wait to see what David's expression would be. The reason was that the Institute has a type of rule. If David came out of the lab without paying for the energy tank he had used, he would be forced to pay twice the amount of gyno points the moment he set his foot outside the lab. It would still be automatically deducted from his account. And if he doesn't have the necessary amount of gyno points to exchange, he would be automatically assigned forcefully to a specific task for a specific amount of time by the Institute. That was the moment the blonde boy was waiting for. He could imagine how the other boy's expression would be, and that got him excited. That was the reason he instigated David, to make him leave the lab in anger without paying, so he could finally teach the boy a lesson on behalf of the professor to gain the professor's approval and favor. Upon seeing the change of David's attitude, the prof raised his eyebrow in slight surprise. After a moment, the corner of his mouth tilted upwards lightly. Your explanation was slightly convincing. Go ahead if you think you don't have to pay. The professor's smile widened as he rested his chin with his hands resting on the antique table. David heaved a soft sigh of relief when he heard this. He put on the brightest smile he could possibly muster and smiled towards the old man. Really? Then I will have to thank you, sir, then. I will take my leave now. David thanked the old man and turned to leave. The old man's smile widened when he saw David leaving. Although David doesn't like thinking too deeply into things, his brain soon found that something was wrong with the old man's words and also the atmosphere. He chose to ignore it, but his body was soon reacting to something as his eyes appeared to droop slightly. He couldn't possibly ignore it this time. He turned around again to face the old man. Do I really not have to pay? David asked again. The man smirked and said, of course, you could choose not to pay if you so wish. When he heard the words, David's smiling expression had turned expressionless. The man's words clearly meant that he could choose not to pay, but he clearly didn't explain what would happen later, and from the old man's smiling expression, he was smiling as if wanting to watch a show. Even all of the interns, especially that blonde-haired bastard, had the same face. His expectant expression is more than disturbing. An old man like you being so petty. How shameless could you possibly be? As David thought of this, he put on a disdainful expression while he tapped on his imprint. And to the disappointment, if the crowds, he spoke out the words they weren't expecting him to say. Hazel, settle the account from the energy hall. A voice rang out. Done. In 25 minutes, the science class would commence, it's advisable to leave at this moment. Looking at the dissatisfied expression of the crowds, David left. Seeing David's back as he left, the prof just smiled. He wasn't the least bit annoyed. David, interesting young man. He chuckled, turning towards the students standing at each side of his desk. Enough fun for today. Now, the development of the slit-eye gene is a very simple and basic procedure. But why the F***ck haven't I seen anyone with a 100% success rate? The prof's raspy voice started off slow at the beginning, but then it was rumbling as loud as thunder towards the end. He threw the file in his hands furiously, which dispersed into multiple streams of light before disappearing, since it was just a piece of an holographic image. The surrounding interns cringed as they lowered their heads. The professors seemed to be dissatisfied with their progress. But contrast to one's expectations, the interns were relieved because this time, reason due to the fact that in a situation where the professor was really angry, he would be silent, but in a case where he wasn't really that angry, he would throw a fit. In no time, DAV was out of the laboratory. He was currently standing at the entrance of the building. Although he was excited about his increase in strength, and also desperately wished to measure his strength, but he knew his priorities well and enough. Although he didn't look like much, he was a man of principles who knew that there was time for everything, during which he would perform those duties to the best of his abilities. When it was time to eat, he would do so without hesitation and even enjoy doing it. When it was time to practice, he would also perform to the best of his abilities, and when it comes to reading well, although reluctant, he still forces himself to grasp the limit he had set for himself. And when it came to priorities, he performed them without any hesitation whatsoever, and his priority at this point in time was to reach the next lessons before the time runs out, and according to his calculations, he would need to rush to the next class with his full strength in at least 17 minutes. Thinking up to here, he speed up the velocity of his body's blood revolutions, making his heart thumped in an oppressive manner. If one had an extremely extraordinary hearing, one could seemingly hear the slouching sound of his blood as two sounds of heartbeat propelled blood further into his veins and body as they vibrated with power. His body was currently filled with energy while his heart thumped repeatedly like a power piston in a cylinder with force. With his acting as an engine, he tightened his muscles, and then suddenly released it. He dashed forwards with inconceivable speed. A single step from DAV was as long as 5 meters. He dashed at a speed of 5 meters per second. DAV was surprised at his speed, when suddenly his instincts warned him while he was slow to react. His body seemed to react without his brain giving the signal. His body bent backwards forcefully, as if he had no spine nor a vertebral bone in his body akin to a broken stick. His legs were still running perfectly straight, but his upper body was bent backwards flatly parallel to the ground. In that moment he performed the action. He watched with wide eyes as a metal block almost 2 cubic meters brushed past his lips, bruising it slightly. Cold sweat instantly formed in his back as he thought about the crises he had luckily avoided. He had suddenly lost control, since he had almost forgotten his sudden gain in strength. In that moment, he had a feeling, like an epiphany, but also not an epiphany. Like he had comprehended something, but also nothing. But in this moment, he couldn't care less about anything. He could only thank his luck. If he had rushed in head first toward the metal block with his full moment, it was unknown what would have happened to him. Even with his increase in strength, he wasn't as hard as a steel metal block. His face and body smashing the metal block wouldn't be a pretty sight. The workers who were operating the machine that uses magnetic force to pull the metal block that easily weighed 300 kilograms were stunned. As the machine required 3 people who were in sync with each other to operate it, only 3 of them saw the scene. These 3 people had been in the Institute for more than half a decade. They had seen plenty of bizarre sights, movements, diet, all sort of things. They had also seen plenty of fights among powerful people that they had long gotten used to them. There was even a time when there was an irreconcilable conflict between 2 instructors. The conflict evolved as they had to fight to resolve the issue. Their fights was phenomenon, as the group couldn't step 100 meters close to them otherwise. They would suffer, and in a worst-case scenario, They wouldn't even know how they had died and would only watch with wide eyes as their life slips away from their grasp. Clearly, some things within the Institute couldn't surprise them anymore, as they would just watch with dull eyes. But they were stunned by David's movements. They watched with slight surprise as the scene where Dav's body bent flatly backwards and his lower body still running with large strides. It was as if his upper body and his lower body were two separate entities, both thinking and acting differently. The large metal block brushing against his lips. They couldn't help but look at each other, as if asking what kind of bizarre gene did this guy merge with. But that was all. They were only slightly surprised at his performance because it was odd, not because it was powerful or anything. Davy straightened his body once more. He felt he was truly flexible all over his body. Although he had felt like that previously, it was a lot different this time. Recollecting he had someplace to be, he dashed out fast. Ignoring the two stunned men, David put his thoughts together. Currently, there was only a few minutes left to the start of his next lessons. Although he wasn't sure how long it would take to get there on foot, but he had roughly estimated the amount of time needed to be around 20 minutes. If no situation pops up, that is. But under the circumstances where unexpected instances occurred along the way, stealing his attention, he would be severely delayed. Opting to call forth a sky cruiser wasn't an option either, because calculating the amount of gyno points left, his account would be mostly empty had he done TGAT. He had to find means of earning points, otherwise he would surely be doomed. In the Institute, there are numerous uses for gyno points which could benefit the students in lots of ways. For example, gyno points could be used to purchase an F-grade serum, which could be used in strengthening one's heartbeat, blood revolutions, or circulation, and in the process, strengthening the body. They could be used to borrow manuals containing special exercises from the archives. Special exercises contains, exercises that are deemed special due to their effects of increasing the body's blood revolutions or cycle in a steady but at an increasingly fast pace. Special exercise are exercises which directs the body enhancements towards a particular part of the body, instead of the normal strengthening and flexibility part of the body, along with the increase in blood revolutions. Those manual doesn't contain regular nor ordinary manuals available to the public like running, push-ups, boxing, etc. They're the most basic type of exercise, and their effects are only so-so. Moreover, one would need to train for a couple of years to gain a slight increase of strength and improvement in one's body. Some separate types of manuals, advanced manuals, called unique exercises, could produce special effects when practiced to the highest level. For example, a set of body straining exercise when practiced would place the fleshy body and muscles as the main focus of strengthening rather than the strengthening and flexibility of the bones, muscles, tissues, blood vessels, organs, etc., increasing its tenacity. When such exercises are practiced to the highest level, special effect would be produced, such as the ability to dissolve or absorb shockwave, explosive strength for a period of time, etc. Such abilities are rather useful, since one wouldn't need to waste the time, energy, and resources to strengthen the organs or blood vessels, etc., in caution of shockwaves during combat. As the highest level of unique ability included the dispelling of shockwaves, protecting the internal organs from harm. Gyno points can also be used for reserving a spot in the energy tank. Gyno point also has the function of upgrading one's personal interface to the next level eval. Those are the list of uses listed in the student's handbook. Although there are more uses left, the Institute prefer the students to find out on their own. Firming his resolve, Davy dashed forwards with blinding speed. He could feel the rush of air blowing past his face, and the howls sounding in his ears as he rushed towards the direction the pull in his tag lead him to. Currently, he needed to be in his next class in 17 minutes. He was running out of time already. With swift steps, he made his way through the crowds as he weaved past them in haste with speed surpassing his previous one. Although he didn't know how strong he currency is, he could guess his strength had increased by at least 2 folds. Gasping for his breath, he gazed at the large hall in front of him. He had estimated that it would take him about 15 minutes to get there, but judging by the time, he still had about 5 minutes left, which meant he came 3 minutes earlier than he had anticipated. He was much faster than he thought. He looked towards a hall, and one could say that the hall was a very large one, almost 5 meters tall, looking menacing. The entrance of the hall gate was painted in a very dark color, akin to the mouth of a beast, as if it would devour those who entered into it. Although he was astonished, its aura wasn't enough to make him feel fear. He was just surprised is all, but that was thanks to the sun, which was reflecting against it. After clearing his thoughts, he entered the hall with large stride through the entrance. In the hall, there were about 100 students seated in a 4-row seat formed in the shape of a semicircle in the hall. Immediately he entered the hall, he noticed as a middle-aged man also walked in from the forefront through the front entrance, just a few seconds after he entered. Not minding the man, David looked around the hall. He spotted someone waving his hands towards him. It was Nuclei. He was a bit surprised, though. Seems like our schedule is a bit similar. Although I don't really like him, he helped me a bit, so... He made his way towards Nuclei, as he thought. The middle-aged man peered towards David, who was making his way to an empty sit. At long last, he just grunted while making his way to the stand at the forefront of the hall. The lecture was supposed to start 5 minutes early, but there was a 5 minutes grace each instructor must give before starting the lecture. But if there was a student who was still late despite the 5 minutes grace, the instructor had limitless rights to punish such student or leave him or her be, but if it wasn't the case, then the instructor would have no choice but to swallow his anger. Although DAV was late, he still came seconds before the instructor. Judging by the way the instructor gazed at him earlier, it was clear that he was looking to punish DAV, but he clearly couldn't, as there are several hidden monitoring instruments laying around watching them ready to be used against him. In the institute, there were many fighting off. The chance to become an instructor, a slight mistake could just be devastating if used against the person. DAV had been clearly lucky this time. If he stayed to admire the hall's entrance for a few seconds, it was unknown what might have happened. But from the clear grunt the instructor gave, it was clear that the instructor was dissatisfied and has taken quite a note of him. DAV took his seat by Nuclei's left empty seat. Not bothering with pleasantries, he just nodded his head as a sign of greetings. Nuclei also didn't mind, as he knew that talking when the instructor hadn't said anything yet was just been rude and disrespectful. He thought Fave was aware of the fact, but he was just wrong. DAV was just reluctantly say anything to the blabbermouth, lest he run off his mouth once again. Sewing as the last person had settled in his seat, the middle-aged man scanned through the quiet students. Quite satisfied, he then opened his mouth. "This is science class, and my name is Stamos Vestro. I am your instructor for this semester. The code is 2340804792157. You may begin." Instructor Stamos announced loudly towards his audience in a flat tone. Upon hearing the words of the instructor, the students immediately perform a differing series of actions. DAV watched, wide-eyed, as they performed the action to summon their holographic image. Not willing to lose out, DAV swiftly tapped his hands, calling forth his own holographic image as fast as he could. But that was all, as he could not see through another's holographic image, which was imprinted according to each student's genetic code. All he could see was a ray of light whose color appears to be interchanging. He gazed around, only to realize he wasn't the only one at a loss about what they were supposed to do after calling forth the holographic image. He immediately turned towards Nuclei, showing as Nuclei seemed to be aware of what the other student were doing. "What's going on?" DAV said in a low voice to Nuclei, who was seemingly busy swiping something in a ray of light. "Connecting my neurogenic interface to this virtual pathway network, but using the code provide JUT now by the instructor." Nuclei answered fluently, as if he had expected the question from David. David was stunned, as he stared blankly towards the now still Nuclei. Coming back to his senses, "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked in a more forceful tone this time, but clearly with an almost audible voice. Sighing, Nuclei answered again, but his eyes appeared as if he was in a daze. "He is currently immersed in the virtual space. Just input the code 2340814792157. The AI would do the rest." Hearing these words, DAV immediately did as he was told. He typed in the code. As a result, a single option was given to him, listed in the interface. Science 101. He delayed no longer and clicked on it. The instant he did so, his eyes also appeared dazed as they glazed over slowly. Blackness immediately filled his vision. Bursts of lights exploded in the next moment as they swirled around in his head. After a few seconds, he realized he was in a large hall, not quite different from the one he was in real life. Nihia was also seated beside him like the previous times, and the Instructor Stamos, was also standing at the forefront. HM, where is this? He punched him thigh, but it is just fragments of light, though. As his hands and thighs turned into multiple fragmentation of light before forming back together. The only difference was that the four walls surrounding them were replaced with four white walls. He was jolted out of his thoughts as the instructor took the liberty to address the students. Ahem, I'm quite sure you've read the students' guidelines and knew about this space, so I won't be delving deeper into the matter. He started with that. Upon hearing this, David almost snorted loudly. Typical lecturers, not willing to waste their time explaining. We'll go straight into the main topic for today. Spryer. As soon as he said the words, the surrounding light instantly distorted, morphing into a big and clear word, Spryer. David was momentarily surprised as he shouted in his head, virtual world. He was currently immersed into a light virtual space the instructor had burrowed or created from a virtual network provided by the Institute. It's called a light virtual space because you can't feel a thing here, and one's body is just made up of multiple condensed brain waves and electrical current directly connected to the gene responsible for the optical nerve, transferring images to the brain and also manipulating it in amounts. It's a complicated process, though. The instructor continued. Spryers are beings modified to grow stronger at a more faster rate than a regular Homo sapiens ever could. The moment the words came out of his mouth, the lights from the surroundings covered to form two images of internal view of a human. They are pretty similar to each other, but David was quick on the notice that one of the human in the images seemed to have two hearts beating almost simultaneously. His mouth almost dropped as he thought back to when Instructor Ella informed them that there was a foreign object implanted into their bodies. Not everyone took it seriously, him especially. He had never thought too deeply about the fact that there was something foreign in his body. The instructor gestured. The images floated to him as they stably took form beside him. The main difference between a Spryer and a regular Homo sapien is the fact that we have another organ which performs the functions of a heart, beating alongside our original one. The instructor pointed towards the organ which was located beside the organ of one of the images. The dark red organ was beating alongside the heart, and if one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't even know which was the real heart among the two. The dark red organ was beating alongside the heart, and if one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't even know which was the real heart among the two. After explaining that, he continued, the function of the organ is to transmute and purify the blood, mutating it into a type of mutagenic fluid which strengthens the body as a whole. He made another gesture. The organ which was attached to the heart instantly expanded by several folds as the inside became clearly visible. The students could see as blood rushed through from the original heart. Then, from the blood vessels of the main heart, blood was pushed towards the foreign organ. The blood pumped directly into the organ through a major blood vessel, then into the tubes connecting both organs together. The image showed as the blood entered into the organ. It passed through a tiny tissue-like substance, after which the blood split into multiple paths as they followed a few twists and turns into different tissue-like substance. It could be seen clearly as when the blood emerged from the tissue-like substance which was still inside the organ. The color of the blood had gone slightly darker as they passed through the tissue-like substance, after which the passages met to form a single passage, leading to a dark black stone-like object, embedded right at the center of the heart. DAV was amazed as his mind was seriously blown away. He had never once liked the subject pertaining to biology, as it proved to be a difficult topic for him. But with this level of explanation and experience, he was amazed by the mysteries involved. If not for the illustrations given by the virtual space, he was sure that he would be unable to understand a single thing if they were explained to him by words. The mutated blood was then seen circulating through the body. As soon as the blood passed through a tissue or bones, it could be seen that they got a little denser and also simultaneously softer. One wouldn't know how to explain it without seeing it. Each time the blood circulated through the body could be seen getting stronger with each cycle. The students couldn't help but cry out in astonishment as they were amazed by the scene in front of them. Signaling with his fingers, the image compressed again from the enlarged organ to the internal part of the body. Choosing a path is very crucial at the beginning stages of being a spryer. Now, it all depends on what exercises characteristics you chose to indulge in, as the end results are the same. All you need to do to get stronger is to make your heart beat faster. The faster you can make your heartbeat flow within your limits, the faster your rate of improvement will be. So choose your exercise characteristics wisely. Before we depart, any questions? The instructor peered at the students, but he was secretly hoping no one would be on their right senses to ask yet, but clearly, it was still wishful thinking. Underscore, as he saw several students light up the question raise. It was a tiny button at the bottom left corner at the edge of the table. When tapped, a slightly visible ray of light would burst forth, as if trying to pierce the heaven. But to call it a bright ray of light was an overstatement. The light glowed dimly, but visibly. It was clear enough for the instructor to see. Upon seeing this, the instructor's face dropped for a bit. He was hoping the students would be dazed by what they had seen and was wishing that no questions would be asked, but clearly, he was asking too much as numerous dim lights shot upwards. With an expressionless face, he picked a random light. "You there, what seemed to be the problem?" His voice boomed in an obvious flat tone. He is clearly not happy. David saw with raised eyebrows as the instructor picked the dim light glowing beside him. It was Nihia, eyes in him. Although a bit startled, he composed himself rather quickly, and he asked his question. "Instructor, earlier you said the stronger and the heartbeat, the stronger we would become. Doesn't that mean that we have no limits to how stronger we can grow, if it depends on that?" Nihia asked in a puzzled tone, but judging by his face, he was obviously excited. Dark clouds instantly boomed on the instruction's face, as his formerly expressionless face turned gloomy. "If that was the case, why would I be here teaching a bunch of dummies? I would have been living my life freely and unrestrained." He almost shouted out loud, but he managed to restrain his anger. He had gone through this numerous times, but he still wasn't used to it. Feeling the glare and the brewing anger coming from the instructor, Nihia flinched slightly. Taking a deep breath, Stamos replied flatly, "No, one can't just grow stronger just like that. They're the so-called bottlenecks. And just because you want your heart to beat fast doesn't mean it would actually do that exactly." Without waiting for his reply, he called out to someone else. "You said something about exercises characteristics. Then you elaborate clearly on the matter," the young lady asked. The instructor nodded his head in approval. There are lots of ways to get people excited and get their heartbeat to spike up beyond its limits. It's just like choosing a suitable Dao path for oneself. Choosing an oath in which your exercise can be executed to get the best results. Seeing the still confused expression of the students, the instructor enumerated. For example, for first-timers like you, after encountering the first bottleneck, you will be tasked on your first assignment to kill REBs of a low level. The thoughts of killing a beast humanity loathes gets most new students' heart excited, while some geniuses might just reach a new height with just the thoughts itself. It's just like choosing a suitable Dao path for oneself. For those who originate from the Asian continent, and for those from the Western continent, it's just like choosing a knighthood path, and those from the European continent. It's almost like choosing which voodoo attribute is best, and in this case, it's choosing the best manual in which your exercise can be executed to get the best results. Seeing the still confused expression of the students, the instructor enumerated. For example, for first-timers like you, after encountering the first bottleneck, you will be tasked on your first assignment to kill REBs of a low level. The thoughts of killing a beast humanity loathes gets most new students heart excited, while some geniuses might just reach a new height with just the thoughts itself. Some might just be a natural-born sadist. Torture makes their heart rate soar, resulting to an increase in strength. That is just some of the orthodox path, but the unorthodox ones, the action of murdering someone in cold blood, gets some people's heart jumped, excited, and pumping at an abnormal rate, which would inevitably lead to an increase in strength. Sexual activities also is a path, can be orthodox, can be unorthodox, as there might be people who wishes to be immersed in such actions both day and night. But if a virgin make was asked left alone with 3 naked ladies in a room, he is sure to become stronger after a few days of rest and accumulation. By the time the instructor finished his sentence, he was already smiling in a lecherous manner, as if remembering what he had done in the past. Adjusting his mood, last question. "All right, you there." The boy stood up upon hearing instructor. He asked, "What happens if the organ was damaged?" The boy asked. David was also curious about what will happen if the organ was damaged. The instructor's face turned gloomy once again. Although that question seemed smart, it was a truly foolish one. What happens when your heart is damaged? Of course you die. After that explanation, the instructor made another the gesture as he made a scissors fingers, pointing it towards the heart, as if to cut off one of the vessels. In the organ, the vessel in the virtual image also cut off, as if it was real. Blood instantly spilled in all direction, coagulating around the heart and the organ, making the heart fail. It failed to pump as it normally would. Eventually it stopped. The faces of the students paled in an instant. A piece of advice: when in combat, protect your heart, at least before your head, the instructor concluded, and with a swing of his hands, the lights faded away as the students were logged off from the virtual space. Dav came to. He saw he was still seated, punching his laps. He felt pain shoot up. "Okay, now back to the real world," he sighed. Without waiting, instructor Stamos left the hall through the front entrance. Nihia turned towards Dav. "I heard you were in the energy tank in the last 4 hours. How was it?" Smiling a bit. David frowned. "For hours. I was out that long." Obviously puzzled too. Although he liked sleeping, that doesn't mean he liked being unconscious. With a smile, Nihia replied, "Yeah, but how was it though? I heard one would become stronger when one coming out of the energy tank after exhausting oneself through an exercise," he said excitedly. A small smile instantly formed on David's lips as he looked at his clenched fist. He felt his surge in strength, and he could only say one thing: "It is satisfying." Tapping his head, Nihia exclaimed, "I knew it. There who went into the lab together with you had been showing off their newly found strength before you and the instructor came. By the way, that was a lucky shave. Imagine you came a few seconds late. You have been thoroughly punished. That's for sure." David eyebrow locked. "I wasn't the only one on the lab?" Dav asked. "Of course not," Nihia retorted while mumbling, "You think you were special or something," but he replied, "There were 5 students alongside you who also fell unconscious, but after the instructor left, she came back to pick up the remaining 4. That's all 9 of you who had gone to soak in the energy tank. By the way, I heard it was expensive to stay. There as much was it anyway?" "Casual as usual," Nihia asked. Upon hearing the first sentence, David's frown deepened, as there were 8 other students alongside him who were either stronger, weaker, or on par with him. It wasn't good news to him at all. But upon listening to the remaining sentence, Dab instantly cast a glare at Nihia, who remained as oblivious as ever as they exited the hall. 50 gyno points. Dav answered through gritted teeth. Nihia immediately choked on his saliva. 50 gyno points. Isn't that a little too much? Well, considering the fact that you all got to grow stronger in a more faster rate, it's slightly worth it. By the way, I never knew you were very diligent with the exercises. You were focused all through the run, not even once lost focus. I honestly admire your tolerance," Nihia said, with a DVD full of administration. He nodded his head, but Dav's keen sense noticed the expression of mockery hidden in his eyes, while not entirely hidden. "Do you believe I won't pull out that untamed tongue of yours?" His expression had turned gentle again, giving the aura of a handsome young master. Seeing his serious things had gotten, he quickly changed the topic. I'm going into the archives to select a suitable exercise for myself. What about you? Want to tag along? Nihia asked. David pondered for a couple seconds before answering. I would also like to see what this archive is. They walked together toward the archives. How is the training here compared to those of our family? A slightly old man in a clean attire, seated on a large and expensive-looking seat, asked. How is the training here compared to those of our family? A slightly old man in a clean attire, seated on a large and expensive-looking seat, asked. Phillida thought but before answering, I don't know yet, as we have yet to be taught anything tangible as of yet. But I feel that the training in the Institute is going to be a tough one. Phillida answered curtly and respectfully towards her clan elder, nodding his head in approval. Great perspective as always. There shouldn't be anyone that could pose much threat to you at this moment. You must grasp this opportunity to grow stronger than your peers during this period, Phillida nodded. I will make sure to keep that in mind. Good. The clan elder nodded his head. Then he asked the ant was around the corner. What did you observe from it? Phillida was startled at first, as she wasn't aware of what the clan elder was talking about. But soon, her eyes gleamed as she replied. The Scorpio King ant is weak, as to other ants, a bit special though, as it seemed to have the ability to sense danger close to it, and takes off. It also refuses to drop a trail or clues, as it seemed to be wary around strangers. I hate such pets, Grand Elder. Why don't you tell the clan to give me another to choose from? Phillida whined, as if she was a little girl throwing a tantrum. The pour of her pink lips, her glistening golden eyes, the beautiful and lovable face was more than enough to make anyone falter. But the clan elder didn't even blink. He just spoke again. Try to get friendly with it, all right? I'm leaving. Don't bother to see me off. Right? You know what manual you should choose, right? The elder asked as he was about to step out of the room, nodding her head in confirmation. And perfect. He took his leave. What a smart lass. If I wasn't the one who instructed him, I would really think she was referring to a Scorpio King ant. This is also a good thing. Muchin laughed slightly. He squeezed the file containing the audio recordings tightly. It instantly burst into multiple rays of light. That was one of the ways to delete files from the holographic image. David gazed at the building with slight awe visible on his face. Since he had been transmigrated into this world, this was the only building that made him feel genuine awe. The building's height couldn't be measured as it had been hidden away by the clouds. It was a supermassive skyscraper, literally scraping the sky as far as one could see. The building gleamed with the glow of vicissitudes of life, visible by the full color of the building. David wasn't the only one stunned. Nihia was also stunned, as this was the first time either of them had seen the building. Snapping out of their stupor, they entered the building together with the others who were coming in and out of the building with varying expression. As soon as they entered, Davs was instantly met with rows upon rows of shelves, just like a library's, but the difference between the two was that there was nothing in those shelves, as there are supposed to be some books in them, but there was nothing. David was immediately puzzled as he saw some students holding their hands out as if they were holding books within them. Although he was puzzled, it wasn't for long, though. He called out to Nihia. Let's go ask the receptionist, Dav said, pointing at the far distance. There was a young lady who looked to be in her early 20s, behind a large desk which was empty, but her actions showed that she was flipping through the pages of an invincible book. Already standing in front of her, Dav immediately called out to her. Ma'am, we need your assistance with something, Dav said to the young lady. She dropped the invincible book she was holding while she raised her heads towards the person who was seemingly disturbing her. Good morning, what can I help you with? The young lady said with the fakest smile Dav could have sworn he had ever seen in his entire life. It was just too fake. Nihia got goosebumps from that smile. Blinking his eyes, Dav replied, trying to choose an exercise manual. We'd like your advice on what to do, as we are new here. Dav replied. Upon hearing his words, the young lady squinted her eyes as scrutinized both David and Nihia. Then, as if she had realized something, she immediately dropped her fake smile, as if to confirm more thoroughly. So to say, you're both new here, right? Although puzzled, he still nodded his. The moment he nodded his head, the young lady instantly ignored them and continued flipping through the invisible pages, not minding them at all. Taken aback, he was at a loss for what to do. He couldn't help but call out once again, excuse me. Don't disturb me. Just input the code from there and you can access the archive. Then she looked menacingly at both of them. If you look for me again, I will make sure to squeeze every bones in your bodies into fragments. Oomph. She sat down after her threat to continue her readings, not without muttering. Here, I was smiling and thinking they were from the supervising department. TSK, TSK, TSK. They enjoyed the free smile I had practiced for a few weeks. DAV was flabbergasted. He had never seen such violet woman before. What the hell had come over her? He shook his head to clear his thoughts. Nihia had visibly frozen in place, as he also seemed to be in a state of shock. He dragged Nihia towards a notice board where the archive's code were posted. Calling forth his interface, he tapped in the code. Reality instantly flickered like it was a glitch in the next moment. The empty rows of shelves was instantly filled with books. The entirety of the archive lit up like a swarm of fireflies. It was an incredible scene to behold. Observing his surroundings, he instantly saw what he came there for, the exercise manual. The sign shone in an obvious manner, located in a section of the archive. Both he and Nihio went there, obviously excited about getting an exercise manual. When he got there, a big sign of warning filled his vision. Do not touch. Touching means selecting the manual. Dav's eyes instantly furrowed together as he was thinking, how would he know the one suitable for him if he doesn't flip through the pages? Both of them glanced at each other, obviously thinking of the same problem. He got closer to the sheaves where the manuals are located. Different titles assaulted his vision as there were different types of manuals placed there. Dav's eyes instantly furrowed together as he was thinking, how would he know the one suitable for him if he doesn't flip through them? Both of them glanced at each other, obviously thinking of the same problem. He got closer to the sheaves where the manuals are located. Different titles assaulted his vision as there were different types of manuals placed there. Cold shade manual exercise can only be practiced with temperatures of 15 degrees Celsius or below, suitable only to those with cold personality. When practiced to the highest level, although it was impossible to freeze an enemy, one could temporarily suppress an injury with the technique, almost like temporarily freezing it. In freezing environments, one would be like a fish in water, as one's ability would be increased by at least 5% with each level practiced. There were always 7 levels in an ordinary exercise. The path was clearly not his, as he didn't really have a cold personality, so David skimmed through it with his eyes. Upon laying contact with any exercise manual, details would be given to him. Joyous Act Styles Exercise Manual can only be practiced with the assistance of at least 3 women. Increases with each level mastered. The pheromones coming off of a woman will act like a berserk-inducing drug or an anesthetic. The higher the levels mastered, the stronger the inducing drug would be. When practiced to the highest level, one could smell the scent of any woman within a radius of 100 meters in the surroundings regardless of the obstacles. Dav's eyes widened upon seeing this, while his body stiffened. His throat couldn't help but swallow. The manual was a very tempting one. About the ladies used during the practices, they would be provided by the Institute as long as one has enough gyno points to pay. But his bubbling desire was quenched as the image of an ordinary-looking lady flashed past his mind. Shaking his head, he continued to check the manuals that were suitable for him: Raging Waves, Hidden Sting, Inverse Stand, etc. As he looked through the manuals, he hadn't yet discovered the one with the perfect personality for him. His treasures his life above anything else. He had come to realize something. Every single transmigrator seemed to act carelessly. What a joke. If someone who had died unexpectedly was reincarnated, that person would treasure his or life more than anything in the world. Living recklessly, shuffling on the verge of death after each battles, David could only call that stupid. Transmigrators would be mentally scarred from the first death. Their subconscious are supposed to be cowardly when it comes to life and death because they had experienced death once. They wouldn't want to experience it again, for that might be the time they truly die. Although he didn't know about anyone else, Dying once had left a deep impression on him, which prompted him to choose every means necessary to maintain his own life at all cost. Firming his resolve, he decided, henceforth, I will totally focus on my defensive strength. Once I am thoroughly invincible, I will then focus on attack. Normally, with each blood revolutions, one's entire body would slowly get stronger, but exercises manual focus the strengthening of the body in a single area of the body, making the pace of strengthening faster and more efficient, and when it reached a certain point, special effects could be gained. Nuclei and David had long since parted ways since they have to choose their manuals while not being distracted to avoid picking up the wrong manual. They also wished to keep the manuals they had taken a secret from each other. David's eyes froze for a moment as he gazed at a particular manual silently, laying amongst other manuals. But its color was red in color, as if warning others not to touch. Threefold step. It was a lower limb training method. David wasn't at all interested in a lower limb exercise manual as he had decided on focusing on strengthening his upper body. But the moment he laid his eyes on the manual, he couldn't keep his eyes off it as the description popped up. Threefold step. Originally called 12-fold step, but due to its difficulty when practicing and side effects, when practiced at the first level, one step is equivalent to 3 steps. Second level, one step equals 6 steps. When practiced to the highest level, one step would equal 12 steps, invincible in the same level, almost as fast as an orange level REBs. Warning, a slight mistake when practicing could lead to the legs being crimped. Dav's eyes shone when he saw the first description. He was reminded of the time that he ran all the way to the lecture hall. His speed then was so terrific, he almost injured himself. But if this exercise manual was successfully practiced by him, his burst speed would soar through the roof in an instant. He could successfully flee whenever his life was in danger. The thoughts got his blood pumping. His heartbeat rate increased sharply as it spiked past its formal limit. He unknowingly made an advancement in his blood revolutions. It was supposed to be exceptionally loud due to the silence in the library, but it was surprisingly not, as if a silencing spell had taken effect. But as he skimmed through the warning, he quickly calmed down. Although it was a powerful technique, its drawback is also powerful. Crippling the legs just because of slight mistake? The consequences are a bit too harsh. Dav shook his head as he mulled over it. Speed is king. He could use the speed in combat, and as long as was careful and not complacent, he could win a more powerful four. And at the first sign of danger, he could just flee without looking back. And with his weird ability to sense danger, like his body reacting to danger as it normally would, he could just dash out with incredible speed. As long as he had a few meters head start, the enemy should forget about catching up with him. Although he wasn't a very decisive person, evidence to that, he chose a different manual from his initial decision. He gritted his teeth as he decisively took the book down off the bookcases. Although he wasn't a very decisive person, evidence to that, he chose a different manual from his initial decision. He gritted his teeth as he decisively took the book down off the bookcases. Before he left, he checked in Nuclei, only to realize that he was still on the verge of choosing an exercise manual. So without any courtesy, he took his leave. As David shut his door, he was too impatient as he wanted to quickly start practicing on the manual. But he quickly calmed himself down. He sat himself on his bed to get his breathing in order. Any single mistake could lead to his lower limbs being crippled. Trigger training mode, David said in a slightly solemn tone. One had to pay specific amount of gyno points for that, but since he was a 3-star talented student, he had a 9 times free usage, after which he would pay for the next one. The moment his voice sounded out, a soft cybernetic voice rang out in his head. Activating training mode, his AI replied. His room instantly darkened, and in the next moment, it was bright again. But a few things had changed in the span of that moment. The 4-corner plain, white wallpaper of his room had changed into a 4-cornered mirror, reflecting his face back at himself infinitely. The room had also expanded to a 50-meter wide apartment. David sucked in a deep breath. An adjustable room? It was unexpected. David could roughly guess the principle, though. It seems the Institute would pay those students who had the radius of their rooms reduced. One of the few ways to earn gyno points. Taking a deep breath, he opened up his 3D projection. In a folder he had renamed a library, he touched the file called the Threefold Manual. He took out the book from the projection like one would a real book. Thus is only possible due to the fact that the brainwaves and nerves in his body are being stimulated based on the genetic coding of the body into thinking that one was physically touching something. It's up to oneself to determine fake from real. The moment one bonded with an AI from the Institute, one's genetic code will be deciphered by the AI and then kept secret. Even the Institute doesn't have any rights to exercise control over the genetic codes of its students. Any attempt to pry into such information, either by hacking or attempting to pry the AI, would initial the self-wipe sequence, as all the data in the system would be wiped off instantly. Holding the manual in his hands, he opened it. A ray of light flashed as the content within was revealed. Threefold step, a technique that compresses the power of 3 steps into one. First level, threefold step. Second level, sixfold step. Third level, ninefold step. Warning: a slight misstep might result into crippled legs. For better results, best practiced within a gravity room, levels of the gravity can be increased over time. 20% effectiveness when practiced with the gravitational room. The training speed slows down by about 1/3 without the gravity room. Note: gravity room can be replaced with gravity stones. P.S. Took the most talented individual 3 months to learn it to the prosaic level. Gravity room? Although he hadn't heard of it, DAV could still infer from its name the functionality, but gravity stones? He had absolutely no idea. Practicing this manual is more difficult than I imagined it to be. And what is prosaic level anyway? Forget it, probably the final level. DAV frowned as he could remember that although other manuals had their conditions, it wasn't these much. I guess that was the reason the Institute made it glow red. Checking his PC for info about the gravity room, the information popped up instantly. He was mostly correct in his assumptions, though, as the gravity room increases the gravitational force in the room. The gravity room only had 20 levels to it, which is equivalent to 20 times the normal gravity. It was slightly expensive to use, though, as 1 hour of usage costs 5 gyno point per usage. Shouldn't things like this be free? DAV grumbled. Tapping softly on the holographic image, the results of weight buttons came through. Gravity stones are literally buttons that weigh an enormous amount of compressed matter. It's made from a unique stone found at the depths of the outer world. In its normal form or state, the material is no different from any other stone which could be found anywhere. But once a bead of mercury is dropped onto it, its molecular structure changes in an instant as the mass would gain an obvious increase in weight. Its atomic structure changes as the chemicals react to each other, but its physical structure remains the same. But there is a drawback to it. The moment the gravity stone was immersed into the liquid, the atomic bonding in the stone gets thicker and heavy and also very fragile. In the instance where the stone had suddenly fallen off, the moment it landed on the floor, it would shatter into multiple pieces. The material turns an incredibly fragile, and although it won't be crushed by its own weight, it would still shatter if it was dropped. The Institute molded it into a shape of a button due to the fact that it could easily be fixed onto one's clothing and also easily removed. The suitable place to fasten the material would be on the shoulders, where the gravity can easily take effect on the body. There are different qualities to the gravity stone. They weigh 50 kilograms, the next 100 kilograms, the next 150 kilograms, the next 200 kilograms, etc. And they simultaneously cost 50 gyno points, the next 100 gyno points, the next 150 gyno points, the next 200 gyno points, etc. Dav's eyes blinked rapidly when he saw the prizes listed. Without any hints of hesitation, he swiped his hands, closing the page decisively. I need to earn money fast. DAV pursed his lips as he thought. Meanwhile, he opened up the manual. Although training with the gravity room or training with a gravity stone would speed up his practice by much, he didn't have enough money tokens that happened. He decided to train without any equipment. Although things might be slow, it was still a start. Checking the manual over and over again, he made sure to memorize everything and the key points more specifically. He started from one section first, learning how contract his heart muscles, making it skip a beat. Adjusting his breath, he started breathing in a weird but a particular manner. Adjusting his breath, he started breathing in a weird but a particular manner. Breathe in, breathe out. Buzz, buzz, buzz. One could hear a faint vibration like the sound of a buzzing bee from his breathing. His heart beat softly, but was increasing in momentum as it started beating heavily. In, out. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. Upon noticing this, David was confused. The momentum instantly faded while he was immersed in his confusion. It had taken him 5 minutes to learn this particular aspect of the technique, and it would probably take around 20 minutes to perfect it. If this goes on, it would take me more than 3 months to reach the highest level, or the prosaic level like the manual had written. At most 6 months. Didn't that mean he was half as talented as the student who had practiced it to the prosaic level in just 3 months? Dav's frown deepened. As expected, there are more talented people in the Institute. Better keep it down than to invite disaster onto oneself. But although he thought that way, he was incredibly surprised on the control he had over his body. It seemed as if he could move any part of his body, even down to the cellular level. Even his organs, he felt as if he could shift them slightly, or at most, move them at a limited pace of frequency. Although the instructor had said something like this before, it was still stupefying to experience it personally. Clearing up his thoughts, he proceeded to the next aspect, the rhythmic control of his legs' muscles. What David was unaware of was the fact that although a Sprier had incredible amount of control over their body, it wasn't to the cellular level. It wasn't to the extent of that they could move every single part of their body. It was an impossible feat. It is even more of an impossibility to move the organs as one wished. Even expert phasers don't have the ability. But David felt as if he could do it, although he hadn't tried it yet since he was pretty preoccupied with training on a manual. Within the span of 5 minutes, veins bulged out of his legs like little snakes as they scurried about in his leg in a seemingly ordered manner. His muscles bulged out as his leg seemed to swell by 2 folds. The training suit provided by the Institute seemed to stretch to its limits. In 10 minutes, he had mastered the aspect of the technique. For the last aspect, it was to control his foot so that the moment he stamped down his feet, the force would be transferred upwards to his waist. The aspect took him only 2 minutes and some seconds to master. All that WS left was to perform the aspects, both simultaneously and respectively. He went back to his bed to get his breathe in order and prepare for the moment. Getting off from his bed, he took a deep breath. Let's begin. He placed his right foot forwards as if to take a step, his body teeling forwards at a slight angle. The key to the training depends on how much control one could exercise in the bones, muscles, breathing, blood vessels, etc. It's a given that those with the gift of multitasking would learn them at an astonishing pace. Dav's breathing became heavier, and his eyes drooped slightly, although it would take time learning the first level of the technique. But within his gaze was a hint of stubbornness. He wanted to see where his limits were. His body was adjusting to his mood. Breathe in, breathe out. Halfway into taking another breath, he froze suddenly. In that moment, the muscles in his body contracted. He could feel them tightening as if he was exerting an enormous amount of force. Thump, thump, thump. His heart pounded fiercely in his chest like stampede of a fierce bull. Suddenly, the muscles in his chest tightened as he felt his heart skip a beat. That was the moment he was waiting for. He instantly took a step forwards. But if one saw the left leg, which was about to land on the ground, fiercely more clearly, they would see as the muscles in his legs twitched rapidly, as though a dragon was swimming within. Veins bulged slightly, twisting fiercely like little snakes scurrying around his leg. But the moment was rhythmic as they vibrated in a peculiar manner. He was running out of time. He had to land his left leg before his heart continued its raging momentum. He had less than half a second left. David seemed to have transformed into another entity as he roared out loud. His leg that was about to miss out by a few milliseconds was instantly forced downwards. Bam! Thump! Pump! 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 Almost at the same time, his leg landed. His heart sounded out like a drumstick striking a gongan. Also, assuming he hadn't grown stronger with the help of the energy tank, it would be impossible for his legs to land before his heart sounded out. He was confused as he thought he wasn't going to successfully stomp his foot before his heart sounded out. But he was swiftly distracted from his thoughts. He felt the blood, which was supposed to circulate in his body, rushed with max velocity towards his left leg fiercely. He could feel as his left leg was filled with incredible blood energy. It was strengthening his left leg at an astonishing pace. The cells within his leg sucked in the energy like a sponge to water. Dad's eyes shone brightly. It's this feeling. This was the feeling he was looking for. The feeling of hot blood pumping into his leg, strengthening and providing endless energy. Excitement shined in his face as his eyes seemed to glow a dark red hue. After a few seconds, the energy seemed to be fading. As if sensing something, Dav's VNs bulged. His body breathing started to become heavy as his body senses this heaviness. The feeling was so thrilling, he never want to lose that feeling. His momentum had almost faded away due to him being distracted, savoring the feeling. But he tilted his body forwards again, and with explicit precision, he directed his right legs forwards, while simultaneously contracting the muscles in his chest. His heart contracted forcefully and expanded as David's eyes seemed to redden. The feeling is here again. Pump, pump, pump. David could hear the sound of his heart expanding and contracting under the massive pressure. As a result, more strength rushed to his body. Suddenly, his heart skipped another beat. Before it could continue, the muscles in his legs vibrated as the blood vessels seemed to open more widely. He stomped his leg with incredible force towards the ground. Bam! Thump! He was clearly faster this time. Dark red blood pumped into his leg, but was instantly met with the tremor gained from his leg stamping against the floor. The forces smashed the incoming blood towards his flesh, bones, muscles, and veins, strengthening them at an incredible speed. Endless amount of energy seemed to fill every fiber of his very bones. Dav desperately wanted to moan out in pleasure, but doing so would disrupt his pace. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he was incredibly focused. Without being needed to be told, he took his third step. His heart skipped a beat. Without hesitation, he stamped his rhythmic, vibrating foot to the ground. Two sounds rang out simultaneously from his room. Panting heavily, but he didn't seem to notice. He continued with his practice. Without being needed to be told, he made his third stride. His heart skirted a beat decisively. He stepped his rhythmic, vibrating, and protruding feet to the ground. Two sounds rang out all the while from his room, gasping vigorously, yet he didn't appear to take note. He proceeded with his practice, completely overlooking his environment. Somewhat more than 20 minutes, David unexpectedly dropped down to the floor. He was completely depleted as he gasped for breath rapidly. Enormous measure of sweat trickled from him, splashing his effectively wet combat suit. He was at present depleted of energy, as he didn't have any left. His legs jerked every now and then, much the same as the tail of a fish that had left the ocean. The legs that had expanded by two folds started contracting at a speed seen to the unaided eye. The protruding veins and muscles started to decrease one at a time, until at last got back to its usual size. The curving snake-like veins were like snakes settling down to rest after a massive dining experience. A couple of moments later, wheezing sounds rang out from the room. David had fallen into a deep sleep. A couple of moments later, the room, which had extended already, returned to its original size. It was the evening of the full moon, as the delicate beam of moonlight arrived on the earth. It was said that under the full moon, no evil will stay covered up. On this day, REBs would go crazy as they get more berserk during this period. In the same building, which had a different dorm number on its entryway. Inside the room, a youngster could be seen. He had entirely respectable highlights with a marginally attractive face. His stature when contrasted with David's, he is taller by a head, with a marginally attractive face. Yet, at present, his demeanor seemed turned as though he was retaining something inside him, battling a kind of devil inside him. Veins swell in his brow as he gritted his teeth. Faint recoiling sounds came out as though it is squashed to pieces. Out of nowhere, his face turned savage. He had lost the battle. At that time, his real hair developed an amazing speed as they grew out from his body, looking very thick and ductile. Hints of bones breaking rang out nearly simultaneously. Snap! The bones in his legs appeared to snap in reverse. The muscles in his body burst out furiously, as the youngster appeared to have grown a couple of feet taller. Oh! A long and horrendous yell tore through the environment. The youngster appeared to have transformed into the combination of a monster and a man, as sharp teeth jutted from his lips, uncovering a sharp glint. The room was transformed into a wreck. The clusters of mist cleared a path as the main beam of the sun pierced through the air. The breeze blew about, delicate and delicate. The fowls trilled delicately, and the ants made a remarkable crickety sound as though they knew not to be exceptionally boisterous. It was a staggering inclination for one to encounter it. It was the ideal air to meditate. A few figures could be seen on different spots around the residence of the Institute. They were in various positions as they zeroed in their brains on rehearsing their exercise manuals, since this was the kind of prerequisite their manuals mentioned. From this, one could construe that their manuals inclined towards the improvement of the psyche, and when the brain was incredible enough to shape such a psychological force, their rate of improvement would burst out furiously as they had enough mental force and enough command over their bodies to flow their blood at a quicker speed. Subsequently, the expansion in strength. In any case, the manual isn't reasonably suitable for all, as some others have violent inclination. In spite of the fact that it may help quiet the brain, it's difficult to make an advancement from it, as it is a totally different way from their genetic characteristics. David scowled in torment as he strolled through the passage towards the cafeteria. He had woken up before, however, he was promptly attacked with an unbearable craving and torment. It was the appetite that woke him up before. Furthermore, the torment that constrained him awake in spite of the fact that the sleep had given him a portion of his energy, it was of a very little quantity. As he strolled, any individual who saw him would think he was busy the whole night, as he was by all accounts sapped of energy. He immediately advanced toward the cafeteria. Food could be conveyed to his room, yet he expected to update it by one more level to access such applications. Oomph! Dav snorted as one of his hands delicately tapped on his legs. His legs were somewhat sore since he woke up. Rehearsing the manual appeared to have spent the greater part of my energy. Later on, would need to practice only after I have eaten my fill. He entered through the recognizable access to the cafeteria. There weren't a lot of individuals who had woken up yet, so there were even less individuals who were currently within the cafeteria. Not even trying to check his surroundings, he went straight towards the machinery. His imprint was examined as a voice sounded out. "Great morning, David. Have an extraordinary day." The second the low, automated voice sounded out, an opening was made in the machinery as it slid in from a hexagonal shape. Seeing the plate of food, he got it right away. He was not in the disposition to talk at this moment. Subconsciously looking for an agreeable spot to sit, he spotted one at the corner other than the air box/view box, which had an incredible perspective on the Institute. After sitting, he promptly started to eat. He didn't worry about what he was eating this time. He simply cut and popped it into his mouth. The menu picked by the establishment for the morning was a couple of bits of prepared vegetables. The sum was minuscule, and in the event that one truly needed to, they could count the sum in the lunchbox. Nevertheless, as David popped a solitary bit of leaf inside his mouth, his taste bud exploded with sweetness as he was unable to help murmuring, it was unexpectedly delicious. In any case, he was too ravenous to even think about savoring the taste, so he just chewed it and afterward gulped it. The moment the food entered his stomach, a warm current spread all through his whole body. He started to feel rejuvenated, as his recently sapped energy appeared to return to him. He was amazed. Without being told, he popped another spoon of vegetables into his mouth. The warm current expanded exponentially. He could feel his sore legs improving as energy could be felt accumulating in them. This is good stuff. DAV nodded his head in affirmation. As he was going to take his fifth spoon, which was additionally the last of the vegetables contained in the plates, an uproarious voice interrupted him. "Ah, is this guy the reincarnation of an hungry ghost?" The noisy voice of a person sounded out from the cafeteria. The individual who had spoken was a Caucasian young teenager. He had a long, light brown hair which he tied in a ponytail, a pretty tiny but long nose with a perfectly symmetrical lips. All in all, he was a pretty attractive guy. He was currently walking towards David's position. DAV's spoon, which was about to enter through his mouth, paused as he heard the voice. But as if he heard nothing, he placed the final scoop into his mouth, chewing on them softly. Closing his eyes, he was decent enough to savor the taste this time. Sighing in delight, he opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a brown-haired teenager directly in front of his table, staring angrily at him. Behind the teenager were also 3 male students, glaring at DAV as if to swallow him. One had a large build, his arms almost as thick as one's thigh. He stood behind Nick like a loyal bodyguard. The other had a good physique, as he was just slightly shorter than the muscular guy, but he was with a bald head. The third student was squirrely and a lanky youth. One glance at him, one would instantly see that he was an extremely sly individual. His eyes seemed to shift from place to place. No one knows what plans he was cooking up. David was a bit startled. He was previously so immersed in the feeling that he had completely ignored his surroundings. Looking at the guy, David frowned. But upon noticing his angry expression, David's eyebrow rose slightly, thinking they were asking him to give up his seat. Suddenly, his expression regained its calmness. "I'm done anyway. You can have the table now." David gestured while he stood up, making his way out of the cafeteria. He knew that the best reply to give someone like him is to just ignore them. Nick's expression changed slightly as he gazed at David's back, who was currently walking towards the exit of the cafeteria. Nick had an ugly expression on his face. Suddenly, the lanky youth whispered something in Nick's ear. His ugly expression loosened, returning back to his arrogant and humorous expression. He seemed to remember something as he smiled maliciously. "Wait," Nick called out towards David. He was a few feet from reaching the exit when he heard the voice. Dav's expression tightened. He glanced towards the Caucasian youth with the corner of his eyes. "What is the problem?" DAV was getting impatient, and it was clear from his tone. Nick wasn't angry at all. He had thought of a plan. "You seem familiar to me." He tapped his head with his head lowered, as if to remember. "Oh, I think I got it now. You were with us when the instructor dropped us in the energy room." Nick spoke out with a smile. It was news to DAV, as he hadn't thought of the fact that he wasn't the only one that had recuperated in the energy tank. But so what? Although they might be in the same set, he doesn't appear to be concerned. "Then what about it?" DAV replied in a dull tone. He didn't see the point of this conversation. Nick's smile froze, but then it became frosty. "According to the rules set by the Institute, I can request a compulsory duel to a student per week, in which the other party must accept, as long as there isn't a big enough gap in the power level." His smile grew wider as he said this. He was already imagining himself beating him up. They were up to 5 students that the instructor had dropped to the energy room. He had challenged 2 other students who had been to the energy tank with them, and he had won. But although he won, it wasn't an easy win, though. If it weren't for the fact that he was a 3-star talented individual, he would have lost the first battle, not to mention the second. His 1 day of practice is almost the same as a 2-star talented individual's 2 days of practice, but that wasn't enough to DW. He had actually selected his exercise manual 2 days ago. The energy tank had already strengthened his body by a fair amount, and together with his talent, and through a night of practice, his blood revolution had reached a level of 20 cycles per minute, a terrifying 1 cycles per 3 seconds, from its previous 12 cycles per minute. He was definitely stronger than he was, and previously. He was confident enough to defeat most of his peers. Although not all, he was still confident on defeating most of them. As he stared at David, although he tried to hide his malicious smile, but it was still oozing off of him. David's frown deepened further. Although he had skimmed through his student's guide, he had read of something like that, and he knew Nick wasn't lying either. He was just puzzled about the fact that Nick was so sure he was one of the students that was taken to the energy tank. Scratch that, it's difficult thinking deeply into things. His train of thoughts was interrupted as a voice rang out in his head. Nick requested for a duel. Do you wish to accept? Yes or no? The cybernetic voice of his AI rang out. He subconsciously was about to accept the battle, seeing as he had no choice. His body failed to react, though, as he instinctively felt that something was wrong with the sentence. He checked it again, only to be sure that something was really wrong with the phrase. He requested the battle, instead of imposing it on me. Trying to trick me? He seems he had used his forced duel on someone else, or he was saving it for someone special. Does he take me a fool? Without any hesitation, he rejected the request immediately, and without waiting for him to talk, he walked out of the cafeteria. But before he could completely steer clear, he seemed to hear a roar, shouting out the word coward. Hearing those words, David couldn't help but smile faintly while he muttered, "Why would I bother myself when I can possibly ignore the matter?" Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Back in the cafeteria, Nick's expression kept changing several times. But it wasn't in a good way. At long last, his expression settled on a shade of green. He was exasperated, indignant. He had used a bit of psychology. He had threw in a suggestion that was almost impossible to ignore towards David. Those with little mental power and a cowardly attitude, or even an ordinary person, would subconsciously accept the duel thinking that they had no other choice but to accept the duel. But David was clearly different. Although he had almost accepted the duel, he still rejected at the end. He had used the same method into tricking the second person he had challenged to think he had no choice but to fight. It worked perfectly, but it obviously didn't work on David. As he was about to bellow out in anger to vent, the lanky youth behind him spoke up again. In a gentle but clear tone, "Boss, since he saw through the trick, why don't you just make Straver battle him?" The youth pointed towards the huge guy by Nick's side, indicating for Nick to make the huge guy who is called Straver to battle DAV in a compulsory duel. In a gentle and clear tone, "Boss, since he saw through the trick, why don't you just make Straver battle him?" The youth pointed towards the huge lackey by Nick's side, indicating for Nick to make the huge guy who is called Straver to battle DAV in a compulsory duel. Nick's maddened expression calmed down slightly, but he frowned. "What makes you think Straver is a match for that guy? His physique had been strengthened by the energy tank. You haven't been to the energy room before. You probably don't know its mysteries. Straver is no match for him." Nick shook his head slightly. He had been to the energy room and had soaked in the fluid for a few hours. He knew how strong he became. Even if Straver is a 2-star talent, he hasn't been baptized yet by the energy tank yet. Nick frowned. Sebastian laughed slightly. "I have already considered such matters. Although that guy had been strengthened by the energy tank, and there might be a possibility might even be a 3-star talent. Even more so, he might have practiced his exercise manual. His combat prowess might even be comparable to yours. But..." Sebastian's smile grew as he continued. "What is the use of such power without control? I am absolutely sure that guy hasn't had enough time to study a combat technique nor an exercise technique. But Straver has, to the prosaic level at that." He pointed towards the huge guy. Upon hearing his words, Nick's eyes instantly lit up. "You mean to say Straver had started practicing a technique, and he had reached the first levels of it?" he asked, facing the huge guy behind him, staring at him with expectations in his gaze. Upon seeing him nod his head in acknowledgement, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Ha ha ha. Good. Excellent. Practicing a combat technique to the first level in just a few days of being in the Institute was astonishing. That person deserved to be called a 3-star combat genius. A 4-star talent and a 3-star combat genius as his guard. He was indeed very happy." Straver had been working for Nick's family since he was young. When Nick was about to study in the Institute, his family had used their connections to also admit Straver into the Institute, for the sole purpose of protecting Nick. Straver couldn't help smiling also. He was especially anticipating the moment. He had been with the young master since he was young. He had also done a lot of evil things for him, which he was willing to, since he enjoyed every moment of it. His favorite part was the sound of bones breaking. It is always incredibly satisfying to hear the sounds of bones breaking and the cries of pain and despair. He had always tried his best to hold himself back since he was in the institute, but now he couldn't help but anticipate the battle. David was still smiling, but then he remembered something as his expression turned savage. Why was I not informed of this earlier? Wait, why didn't you inform me first? What stunt are you trying to pull? He turned towards Sebastian furiously. Is this guy trying to control my people? Sebastian was taken aback. He hadn't expected Nick to be smart enough to notice something like that. He had met Nick a few days ago and had given him a couple of ideas. He had noticed that Nick was just the typical dumb young master. With just a few occasional words of flattery, he gained his trust. But now, the dumb young master was getting a little smarter. It was like they say, if you spend enough time with someone smart, it would surely rub off of you. Do not be angry, boss. I had told Trevor that I would surely inform you, but it totally slipped my mind because I was too happy for you. There are many people of our class that had reached 3 cycles per second. It's not a stretch to call you a genius scene once in 5 decades. Sebastian lowered his head in an apologetic manner while he flattered him endlessly. But if one looked carefully at his lowered face, deep in his eye, there was an obvious glint of cunningness deep within, but he had lowered his head. Nick was unable to see it. The feeling of being flattered had overwhelmed him. Still, though, he snorted, "Humph, I will let you off this time." And as for that guy, he snickered. He escaped today doesn't mean he would successfully escape every time. He turned towards Trevor. He would definitely attend history class. At that time, send him the forced duel when you see him. I'd like to see how he would escape this time. Smiling sinisterly, he flung his sleeves as he turned around to walk towards the meal dispenser. He would have happily sent one of his lackeys, Sebastian, especially to pick up his meals as a punishment, but it was impossible to pick a meal up for others, as one's imprint is needed to be scanned by the machine. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Taking a deep breath, the morning cool breeze blew past his face as he came out through one of the entrances of the dormitory. He spoke to his AI for a few seconds before he set off towards a direction. It was currently 7:45 a.m. He had no class for now until 9 a.m. He needed to know how strong he had VB become so. His destination, the training room. The strength quantum room was just a few hundred meters away from the 2 dormitories, the male and the female. In just a few minutes, he was directly in front of the building. He entered the building. The strength quantum building contained several hundreds rooms in the building as they had been numbered. He walked through the hallway, passing by the room numbered 1 all the way to room number 79. Fuss was due to the fact that the rooms from room 1 to 79 had been occupied, evident from the large holographic image that shown occupied. He reached towards the entrance of the room. He stretched his wrist, which had his imprint directly under the protruding flat metal material, stuck by the wall 5 centimeters away to the door. A few dull rays of blue light scanned his wrist. The next moment, the door opened up. Entering through the door, a robotic voice rang out, welcoming him, but also reminding him that he had 8 free uses left, after which he would start paying the necessary amount of gyno points to use the room. Entering through the room, a robotic voice rang out, welcoming him, but also reminding him that he had 8 free uses left, after which he would start paying the necessary amount of gyno points to make use the room. DAV wasn't surprised, but that didn't stop him from raising his eyebrow, even if he had expected something like that. The room was a very large, way more larger than his room. The entire room was built with a special dark red metal. It was up to 7 meters in radius, and also soundproof since it was entirely made of metal. Even if one screamed his lungs out, the sound would remain locked in the room as the echo would keep on reflecting from one side to the other until its energy faded. Wang dang. The bright white days of lights coming from instantly dimmed as a whitish-blue ray of light came from the corners of the metallic wall, giving a slight mysterious feeling and a beautiful feeling at the same time. It was only bright enough to illuminate the surroundings. A voice momentarily rang out in the room. The quantum chamber is programmed with the physical body analysis. helped to analyze and detect the corporeal body data. Approached the measuring padded wall to start. The voice ended. Upon hearing this, he scanned the room with his eyes. His gaze landed on 2-meter-tall wall labeled as a strength measuring tool. Taking in a deep breath, he abruptly punched out. Thud! A dull sound was heard, a few numbers shown over the place his fist had landed. 726 kilograms. Taking back his arm, he frowned slightly as he felt something was wrong. This level of power wasn't comparable to the strength he had shown when he was practicing the other night. Oh, so that was it, he muttered as he remembered what he was missing: heartbeat. He wasn't circulating his blood to his limits. He had read from a manual that it was important to warm up his body first, as they just had the operation a few days ago. It was imperative not to jump into an exercise or a battle without a proper warm-up first, otherwise the heart was likely to fail due to excessive load. Just like an engine, you just don't jump straight to 200 kilometers per hour. No, you start from one first or something might go wrong. Performing a few light exercise first, DAV felt his heartbeat quicked as he picked up speed on his light jog. Hot blood pumped into his veins in a rush. He felt the energy level in his body rise at an insane amount. Thump, thump, thump. He quickened his circulation to its limits, only stopped increasing it when he felt his heart was about to burst out from his chest. The resounding sounds of a stick constantly striking a gongan, echoed out of the room. Massive veins popped out his body. His muscles had bulged slightly as he seemed to increase in height. Veins gathered in his eyes as they seemed to glow red in the dim room. Endless energy seemed to fill his entire body. But the most noticeable thing was his legs. They had expanded by 2 folds. Veins as thick as a finger twisted fiercely in his leg. Muscles could be seen protruding out of his legs as they almost seemed inhuman. He felt as if he could flatten a mountain in a single stomp. He punched out with incredible force. The air seemed to have been pierced through like a bullet shot out. Whoosh! Boom! The sound akin to that of a thunder rang out as his fist created a small wind tornado. The padded wall caved in that moment. The previous numbers was replaced with a set of data. Physical strength, 3773 kg. Blood revolution, 30 cycles per minute, CPM. But David was too immersed in the power he was currently feeling to bother reading the set of data. The power was intoxicating and equally thrilling. He had only ever felt it yesterday. He felt his legs contained a terrific amount of energy. If not released, he might cripple his legs into exploding. Twisting his waist slightly, his upper body tilted to give way to his right leg. Bang! Leg strength, 6002 kg. Blood revolution, 31 cycles per minute. A loud sound reverberated through the room. But David wasn't satisfied as he felt he hadn't even released 1/3 of the energy still accumulating within him. The tip of his right foot had sunken inside the wall, but the wall was slowly healing itself when he removed his leg. Another string of data popped up, but DAV ignored it as he was clearly anxious. Suddenly, he seemed to have remembered something. He spoke up without hesitation. AI, endless running mode now. A slight mechanical sound rang out. The previously stable ground of the quantum room started to move. Without waiting for the transformation to finish, he constricted the muscles in his heart, making his heart skip a beat. He had already performed the oscillating technique on his legs. The veins in his legs was twisting with the faint vibrations of his muscles. Some blood vessels in his legs were forced shut by his muscles, giving extra velocity to the other blood vessels needed to perform the technique more efficiently. His legs stomped towards a moving floor as his figure seemed to blur forwards. It appeared as if he had taken 2 steps forward instead of 1. Bang! Thump! Leg strength, 9501 kg. Blood revolution, 33 cycles per second. Technique, 3-fold step. Progress, barely 2-fold step. Tips, breathing rhythm wrong. The sound of his foot hitting the ground and his heart beating sounded out at almost the same time. The tremor of his stomp conducted from the ground towards sole of his feet spreading to his muscles, bones, and blood vessels, changing, tempering, and strengthening them with the aid of the dark red blood provided by the second heart circulating through his entire body. Without waiting for the sound to fade, his body tilted forwards like he had tripped, falling head first to the ground. But before reached a few inches to the floor, his left feet quickly came forwards as his heart constricted, missing a beat. He stomped forward ferociously with incredible momentum. Bang! Thump! The same familiar sounds rang out again, but it was clearly louder this time. Thunder reverberated as the end gave way. Pump! 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 His blood pushed its way towards his body system, providing him endless strength and momentum. Even the veins in his legs had started to ache slightly, as they had been blood-pressured, since his legs seemed to contain most of the energy. His eyes were terrifyingly bloodshot as he gazed squarely towards the target. Leg strength, 614 kg. Blood revolution, 34 cycles per minute. Technique, 3-fold step. Progress, barely 2-fold step. Tips, breathing rhythm wrong. Note, 1. Gongan, also called the talking drum. The talking drum is an hourglass-shaped drum from West Africa, whose pitch can be regulated to mimic the tone and prosody of human speech. It has 2 drum heads connected by leather tension cords, which allow the player to change the pitch of the drum by squeezing the cords between their arm and body. Nigeria. Wikipedia. Leg strength, 614 kg. Blood revolution, 34 cycles per minute. Technique, 3-fold step. Progress, barely 2-fold step. Tips, breathing rhythm wrong. Bang! Thump! Leg strength, 721 kg. Blood revolution, 35 cycles per minute. Bang! Thump! Leg strength, 803 kg. Blood revolution, 35 cycles per minute. The thunderous sounds went on for some time. Dav's stamp progressed rapidly over time as his leg strength increased bit by bit. Exactly 39 minutes later, he was interrupted as a loud voice rang out. The list of the rankings are being released. Ascertaining your current position. Congratulations, student David, as you have ranked 7th position in the rookies' strength rankings list. You will be rewarded with 3,000 Gyno points. Please wait. It will be sent to your account in a moment. Keep up the hard work. The voice faded into oblivion. Dav paused slightly as he seemed to have regained some of his sanity. He didn't forget to push the emergency stop button to stop the room-sized treadmill. Newbie rankings? It's already been decided? Dav frowned slight as he pondered. Normally, as it had been written in the guidebook, there was always a space of a week before the rankings would be decided upon and then posted by the Institute. But now it wasn't a week, yet they had retrieved the information from the quantum room and then posted the rankings in advance. The rankings was decided in this way. All the new students would need to test their strengths in the quantum room, which in turn would measure their strength accordingly. The bodily strength data would be sent to the Institute to be analyzed and then posted on the Institute's bulletin board for every student to see. It was supposed to happen 4 days later, but judging from the message recently sent to DAV, it appeared the Institute had other plans. The real elites among the new set of students in the Institute were probably making use of their time practicing somewhere else, making use of their spare time preparing for the rankings which they thought would occur in just 4 days. But who would have known that something this unexpected would happen? And so suddenly at that, even those who had some sort of connection in the Institute were even less prepared, which means those that are currently on the ranking lists were not that strong. They were just lucky to have tested their strength the moment the assessment for the rankings was taken. It's the so-called being in the right place at the right time. David didn't allow being on the ranking list get to his head. The situation, in fact, gave him a sense of urgency, arousing his young and hot-blooded competitive spirits instead. David knew he wasn't the strongest amidst his set. In fact, quite the opposite. He thought he was quite mediocre according to his calculations. There were more than 1,000 new students in the Institute, DAV included. They all came from different sectors in the inner world and also powerful families. It would be a difficult matter to ascertain the amounts of elites among the 1,000 students. The moment they became aware of the matter about the rankings, chaos was sure to ensue in the Institute. In fact, They are probably aware at this point in time. According to his speculations, he had previously thought he had no hopes of reaching the top 100. It wasn't that he was being overly humble or overestimating himself. It was because of his special ability to sense danger from those with power levels higher than his. As far as he could remember, when meeting a dangerous person, his body would react differently. His eyes would involuntarily droop down, leaving a slight slit for him to see. His body would relax, while his muscles would tense up like bow of a string ready to be shot. That was his unique combat-ready mode. If one saw him in such state, they would think he was sleeping while standing. Such states was perfect for an enemy to lower their guard, giving him enough chance to launch a sudden attack, or even a sneak attack in some cases. Being on a ranking list is not purely for the fame, but for the gyno points involved. Gyno points are incredibly useful to the students as they could be used for a variety of different useful resources and programs. Just the amount DAV had gotten for 1,000 gyno points is a large sum of amount to the new students at this very moment. If used well, even a 1-star talent's improvement sold could rival a 3-star talent's for a short while, if used wisely. Those new elite students were sure to become extremely pained to the point of fainting due to the loss of the huge amount of gyno points involved. But it wasn't that there is no remedy to the problem. The most common way to snatch another's ranking was to challenge the person. The problem is even if you challenge the person and won, the gyno points can never be retrieved unless the person was willing to transfer it to you. DAV sniffed as he shook his head slightly to clear his thoughts. It was then it dawned on him that he possessed 3,000 gyno points on him right now. His mouth went agape. He couldn't help but gulp down a lump of spit. He had been struggling for a few tens of gyno points not quite long ago, but now he was at several thousands in his possession. He couldn't help but thank his luck. But fortune and misfortune often come hand in hand. The students would be in every corner, trying to challenge him at first sight. The true elites would probably cook up some schemes to make him cough up to 3,000 gyno points in his possession. The fact that only 2 students knew his name and his face wasn't enough to protect him. As long as you have enough gyno points to spare, it was a simple matter to find information about someone. The options available to him was to hide in his room, practice his exercise methods to improve his strength, request for some resources with the 3,000 gyno points, staying indoor the whole week until it was time for the weekly assessments, or could just fight those who came for him. Since he was just ranked 7th, he wouldn't attract too big a fish, as the true elites would go for those in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd position of the rankings. Ranking lists. 1. Graham Storm, 1,000 gyno points for more info. 2. Bucky Wright, 900 gyno points for more info. 3. Nina Cut, 800 gyno points for more info. For Lucas Nija, 700 gyno points for more info. 5. Mexral, 600 gyno points for more info. 6. Khalifa Drake, 500 gyno points for more info. 7. David Syntax, 400 gyno points for more info. 8. Su Xiao, 300 gyno points for more info. 9. Daniel Stromart, 200 gyno points for more info. 10. Eva Lux, 100 gyno points for more info. Pay the required amount to glimpse into their info. Ranking lists. 1. Graham Storm, 1,000 gyno points for more info. 2. Bucky Wright, 900 gyno points for more info. 3. Nina Cut, 800 gyno points for more info. For Lucas Nija, 700 gyno points for more info. 5. Mexral, 600 gyno points for more info. 6. Khalifa Drake, 500 gyno points for more info. 7. David Syntax, 400 gyno points for more info. 8. Su Xiao, 300 gyno points for more info. 9. Daniel Stromart, 200 gyno points for more info. 10. Eva Lux, 100 gyno points for more info. Pay the required amount to glimpse into their info. David's expression twisted slightly. Even if he was aware that you could glean into anyone's basic information with enough gyno points, he was still a bit hopeful. Judging from the side note in the ranking list, it was clear his expectations was squashed quite thoroughly. The Institute would give out basic information about the students in the top 10 for quite a price. The amount of gyno points earned from such transactions would be divided into 2. One portion will be taken by the Institute. The other half would be given the students whose information was being revealed. It was another way of earning gyno points for the students. This reinforced his resolve to fight it out with those out to battle him. Although he hadn't been to the Institute for long, he already had a glimpse of how difficult it was to acquire gyno points. DAV made his way out of Quantum Room. David could see several figures also dashing out of the Quantum Room in panic. Since the dormitory wasn't that far from the place, he could vaguely see what was happening over there. Even if he didn't see it clearly, he could roughly guess the situation. Quite a few shadows were weaving through the way as they seemed to fade in and out of existence from the dormitories. They were rushing towards the Quantum Room with inconceivable speed. There was one that was quite eye-catching among them. He was a burly figure with a huge shape. He is incredibly tall, standing at 2.2 meters tall. His skin color was as dark as the night sky, but his hair made him worth quite the second look as it was green in color. What made him quite eye-catching wasn't the fact that he had no clothes on his upper body, nor was it the fact that he was pretty handsome, with chiseled, streamlined muscles rippling with force. It was the fact that he was literally jumping his way through the obstacles, running a few meters in the ground, and although the floor he stepped on didn't cave in, it still dragged up quite the dust. Then, boom, he shot toward the air like a cannonball. 20 meters. He had crossed 20 meters in a single leap. David could hear the sounds. When he saw the shadows flickering, he knew things were going wrong. But at the sight of the jumping figure, his expression changed slightly. From the figure's physique, it was obvious he was practicing a strength-enhancing exercise method, which implies that speed wasn't his forte, strength was. But surprisingly, he was jumping 20 meters at a distance. It was an incredibly frightening sight. In a bit over 7 seconds, the shadows and the figure would arrive at the Quantum Room. Although the figure was quite intimidating, as well as the flickering blur of figures. Damn it, it hasn't even been a week, and yet, freaks like this already exist, he cursed in his mind. DAV wasn't the least bit intimidated by any of them, though. Placing both his hands in his trousers, he lowered his head by a bit as he walked towards his place. He just wished he had an ear pod to listen to a few music. It would be pretty amazing. Smirking at the thought, in that moment his eyes hardened. His blood circulated to its limits. Blood pumped into his veins as his heartbeat quickened. Stepping sideways, his body flashed. In an instant, he was already 10 meters away from his previous position. Boom! A booming sound was heard as a slam-bang crater opened up his previous location. Ah! An awfully raspy voice rang out in slight surprise. Sturm let out a surprised sound as David evaded his attack by a sudden bodily movement. He had attempted to stomp David out of his way, but his attack missed. Interesting. Chuckling slightly, he gazed at David for a moment, after which he ignored David. He had his eyes on someone else. He wasn't willing to waste a single second. It appeared as if 7th position in the rankings wasn't good enough for him. David frowned gently when he saw the African youth leave, but he didn't say anything. He just watched him as he ran and leaped further into the distance. Suddenly, anger shone in his expression. Whoosh! He twisted his sideways as a fist passed right beside him. His shirt fluttered ceaselessly. FVCK off! He let out a shout of anger. With the twist of his waist, he subconsciously used threefold technique. His leg muscles expanded. VNs popped out from his leg as they seemed to ripple in a consistent frequency. He stamped his foot toward the figure. Upon seeing this, the figure's expression couldn't help changing as they let out a yell. With the limited time, the figure managed to cross their hands together. Boom! The figure was instantly blasted backwards. Their feet dragged 5 meters backwards. Letting out a muffled groan, the dust cleared, revealing a young lady. She was an incredibly beautiful, red-haired woman with her delicate face and figure. But currently, her expression was extremely serious as she stared at David. That kick had almost broken her bones. The force had shaken her organs and disrupted her blood circulation as it was in disarray because she wasn't prepared for it. She needed time to quell down her blood, gather, and circulate them again, which would take a few seconds. David was also pushed back due to the resultant force. but it was immediately nullified as he performed a simple backflip. David stared at the figure as the dust cleared, and he saw the figure. His angry expression calmed down slightly. But still, he was annoyed. A tender voice came out from her mouth. "I'm Janine. Don't worry, I know yours too." She smiled slightly towards David. David stared at the red-haired, his eyebrow furrowed together as he looked towards her. "You paid to get my information?" Janine's expression darkened by a bit. She nodded. "Yes, I was hoping you could lend me your position on the ranking for just a week." She put on a hopeful and teary expression, twisting her body quite seductively. She was hoping to distract him, just a little. If it were the previous him before he met that odd girl, he might have been tempted, but he just looked on coldly as he snickered. "And I would just relinquish the position just because you said so?" Her eyes became more teary when she heard that. She sobbed softly. "See, can you go this one favor for me? I promise to return it after a week." His frown deepened as his expression turned cold. How could he not know what she was trying to pull? He refused to budge for even a second. She was disappointed when she saw David wasn't willing to be distracted. DAV was incredibly wary of her. She had taken a threefold stomp from him, but could still remain fine. Even if it wasn't the true threefold step, it was still quite powerful. He observed her more intently before he noticed that something was wrong. Her face was slightly flushed, and an almost unnoticeable vein appeared on her head. At first he thought it was because she was exerting her strength, and, as she was a red-haired beauty, seemed to be normal, right? But now it doesn't seem likely. She came here even after reading my information, which means she has something to rely on, but she's stalling time for something. What? David thought to himself while he gave her another look over. Not giving it too much thought, he said sternly, "Sneaking an attack on me was quite a despicable move. You should apologize, and I will let this go." Janine stared blankly at David, wondering if he was joking. After a few moments, to her surprise, she saw that he wasn't joking. She abruptly burst out laughing as if she had headed the funniest thing in the world. In that instant, David's eyes shone. This was the moment he was waiting for. Pushing his blood circulation to its limit, power flowed to his system. His muscles bulged slightly as that appeared quite worked up. All of a sudden, he punched out. His fist screamed towards her head like a bullet, clearly not expecting the sudden attack. Her face changed slightly. Clenching her fist, she also punched out. Crackling sound could be heard. She was playing for a contest in strength. Bam! The muffled sound of flesh rang out. Ripples of airwave dispersed as thousands of kilograms flesh collided. DAV felt pain as an incredible vibrating force traveled from his fist through his arm, attempting to crush his organs. His expression couldn't help but change slightly. Strong. He gasped inside. He stared at the girl before him. Bam, bam, bam. David was pushed back by several steps, attempting to dissolve the strength. His face was flushed as he glared at the girl before him. Although he had dissolved the force, the vibrating strength was still there. He couldn't quell it just by moving backwards. His arm dropped limp to the side, as though it was useless. The vibrating force in his body seemed to have locked down the nerves in his arm, making him lose control over it. Meanwhile, Janine took 2 steps backwards. The difference in strength was clear. Janine glanced at David while smirking. "Do you know why I chose you among the others?" Her smile grew wider. "That's because from the information I was given, you practiced a red-level technique. I don't know if I should call you stupid or more stupid." Her expression changed as she appears to be honestly confused about the matter. 3-fold technique is a red-level techniques, and red-level techniques are 2 grades higher than a simple black-level technique, and it's also almost impossible to reach the prosaic stage in 6 months. "Why would you choose one?" she said with curiosity in her eyes. David's frown deepened as he watched BR. What is she trying to do? Hoping to distract by spouting nonsense. But there might be a possibility that she was telling the truth, so he made a mental note to inquire about the levels on techniques. Cut the nonsense. Stomping his legs, he dashed forwards with incredible speed. Janine smiled when she saw this. As expected, his male ego is not willing to admit who is stronger. What a stubborn fellow, she clicked her tongue. circulating his blood. His heart beat loudly in his chest as blood flowed from his vessels to his muscles and bones, but especially his legs. A few meters from each other, he swiftly lashed 2 kicks towards her. Janine wasn't stupid enough to accept those kicks for the second time. She sidestepped the attack and then attacked, attempting to make use of the opening behind David's back. Her fists swished through the air, targeting his back. All of a sudden, David twisted his body, which was in midair. With the momentum, he launched a fierce horizontal kick towards her head, as if he were playing a soccer ball. The air cracked as his kick picked up the wind with force, carrying all of his momentum. Looking at the leg that had swelled to be bigger than her waist, she turned pale. As if she had no bone at all, she bent herself upper body backwards. Whoosh! Her face stung as the kick's wind blew past her face. Not inclined to let the momentum fade, he dropped to the ground while performing a 360 horizontal sweep towards her legs that were supporting her body. The ground seemed to split by the sudden intrusion. As if she had expected something like that, she executed a back flip. Since the momentarily force of his kicks were evaded by her, he pursued her. "Get over here," he shouted crazily as his foot kicked off explosively and akin to an arrow released from a bow. He shot towards her. His left hand shot out in the blink of an eye, reaching again for her head. Janine's expression turned ugly for the first time. When she came here, she was full of confidence, thinking it would be an easy win. She had not expected that she would be the one at a slight disadvantage. She did not have time to dwell on such thoughts. She was incredibly angered as Fist was rushing straight at her, causing her eyes to twitch. A slight chill ran through her head. Tremor Fist. With an angry bellow, she punched both hands at the incoming David, one fist aiming at his oncoming fist, while the other was shooting towards his head. In an instant, an ethereal waves of air seemed to ripple on her fists. Layers after layers of air waves surged forward with incredible momentum, forming slight air whirlpools from the ferocity of her fist. It appears that even if David has twice his current power, he wouldn't be able to withstand this attack. "Good," David said expressionlessly as he planted his legs stably on the ground. He appeared to be as unshakable as a mountain. HS moved his right hand, which was supposed to be paralyzed, and his left hand forming a claw with both hands. He grabbed at the incoming Tremor Fist. Boom! As the two attacks collided, a blast of shockwave visible to the naked eyes shot outwards in all directions, clearing all the dust in the surrounding area, which had been generated from their fight in an instant. Whoosh! The surrounding spectators couldn't help retreating back a few steps in shock as they felt as if a hammer had smashed against their skull, making them almost unconscious. The moment his claw held the fist, David felt as if he had been hit by a speeding train. His head felt very faint, but he managed to hold out still. Gazing into her eyes, David's lips seemed to curl up to a smirk. Janine immediately began to develop a bad feeling. She swiftly wanted to retreat, but her fist seemed to be locked with a force akin to a vice grip. Not waiting for a single moment, David circulated how blood to its limits, as it seemed as though his blood flowed like a stream. His vein appeared to be on the verge of tearing as his heart propelled blood into his system. In the next millisecond, he unceremoniously constricted his heart. It skipped a beat. He had long since raised his right foot up as he pulled Janine toward himself. 39 cycles per minute. Threefold technique. First level. The muscles in his right foot momentarily seemed to expand by 3 folds. Power seemed to have been accumulated in his leg. The pressure they exuded gave one the feeling of horror and helplessness as one looked at it. With her hands locked in place, Janine could only watch as her wide eyes opened in horror as the massive mountain of foot descended upon her. Kaboom! The sound was akin to a missile being dropped as visible shock waves spread throughout the surroundings, stunning the onlookers around, excitement visible on their faces. They couldn't help but retreat even more steps in order not to get caught in the shockwave. Like a kite whose string was suddenly broken, Janine shot through the air like a cannonball. Her fate, yet unknown. Like a kite whose string was suddenly broken, Janine shot through the air like a cannonball. A tyrannical shockwave flung David unceremoniously towards the ground by the force. It was as though someone had dropped a few bombs next to him. He bounced a few times on the ground before coming to a stop. After a few seconds, hoo-hoo, he panted heavily with his two arms were limp beside of him. He could not feel them, nor could he move them. The tremor from the girl's technique had traveled through his arms and disabled his nerves. The bones in his hands had been shaken quite massively as cracks could be seen in them. The tremor didn't stop at that. It was traveling towards his heart and his internal organs with stampeding force, attempting to destroy it. If the tremor wasn't taken care of quickly, he might turn into a bloody mess. David's expression soured as he thought, vicious. That young lady was very cruel to use an exercise technique on a fellow student in the Institute. Although it had been written in the guide, saying was allowed in the Institute, there are a few rules that came hand in hand with the killing. David turned his body over, resting on his back. He was currently circulating his blood to its newfound limits. 40 cycles per minute. The saying was true. Fighting helps to increase the blood circulation. His blood rumbled like a small river as his heartbeat quickened. The blood pressure from his body was quite effective in stalling the strange force. Even then, David wasn't the least bit worried about it. He already came up with a solution earlier when he had taken her fist. It had crippled his arm effectively, and was supposedly to remain so until he could find a peaceful place to practice his exercise methods in a bid to quell the strange force. Of course, what had happened next had astounded Janine. On a normal circumstances, she wouldn't have performed the technique with both hands, but she was a bit maddened at that moment, and she had thought David's arm temporarily useless. She was incredibly mistaken. She had let down her guard, which had cost her greatly, as she hadn't expected David to have the means to resolve the force. And that fast, in fact. Frankly speaking, if he hadn't came up with a solution which had resolved the force, it was almost certain he would be the one with the most injury. The idea he came up with was to use the oscillating force developed from the practice of the threefold step exercise technique to subdue, overpower, and devour the strange force affecting his arm. The threefold step is a technique that amplifies the strength in one's leg by 3 times on the first level, which means that practicing them for the arms would greatly amplify one's strength. And at the same time, it would seem as if that person wasn't satisfied with Earth and greatly yearned for the afterlife. The threefold manual is specially made for the legs, which means practicing them for the upper limbs as a strength amplifier was clearly courting death. Reason for that, the blood vessels in the legs, its amounts, position, sizes, etc., vastly differs from those located in the arms. Using the techniques wrongly might cause the blood to surge and then pump in reverse, which is known as blood deviation. When one encounters a blood deviation, one would be lucky to escape. If it lead to a few blood vessels and nerves rupturing otherwise, it might very well lead to death. Every manual issued such warnings at the beginning pages. Meanwhile, David wasn't planning on practicing the full technique. Even though he had just started the technique just yesterday, it felt incredibly familiar to him. He had divided the key points of the manual into segments and had made sure to practice each of them to mastery. He firmly believed in the phrase divide and conquer. One part of the segment includes a breathing method. Another part consists of the heart muscles constricting method, while the last part involves vibrating and oscillating the muscles in his legs at a very fast pace. An example of that is in a situation where one was freezing, the muscles in the body would vibrate, intending to warm up the body, chasing the freezing sensation away, which in turn leads to the body shivering in, but there was always a frequency to such techniques. Using the wrong oscillating frequency could lead to self-implosion. It took him quite the while to learn that segment, but he did so successfully because of the incredible control he had over every part of the body. It was the last segment that saved him from being wounded by Janine's vicious technique. He had picked the last segment, which included the oscillation of the muscles. He had performed it on his arm at that moment. Even if it was quite impossible to move his fingers and arms, his muscles were quite the exception. It worked. He was surprised at first, but didn't show it as he was in a battle. He wanted to use it as a trump card, and apparently, it worked quite well. David's lips curled up as he thought, vibrating the muscles in his arms. The flesh in his hands were moving and surging like the waves of a great river. It was a scary sight to behold. It was as if millions of ants were scurrying about under his skin. An unstoppable force was generated in his arms. Tremor was instantly formed. He directed the force towards the foreigner. When compared to each other, the foreign force was like the stampede of a beast, but when met with the swarm of billions of ferocious ants, it had no other choice than to get swallowed up. The invading force was ripped to shreds in an instant, left with no time to struggle. Even for a bit, David swiftly controlled his vibrating muscles, attempting to calm the force he had generated. If it reached his internal organs, without sufficient control, it would be no different from courting death. Whew! He breathed out a sigh of relief as he thought. Although I managed to calm the force down, the cracks in my bones had expanded. I need to recuperate to heal up. Thinking up to here, he stood up shakily on his feet. He turned towards the direction of his room. Ignoring the astonished crowds, he started walking. You are quite the tenacious one, aren't you? He hadn't walked 3 steps when the familiar tender voice spoke out. David froze. You are quite the tenacious one, aren't you? He hadn't walked 3 steps when a familiar and tender voice spoke out. David's body froze visibly. Suddenly, he felt his heart skip a beat without him intending it. Strange lights flickered in his eyes. He was thinking in incredible speed. He turned around slowly and looked towards the voice. His expression calm. His eyes couldn't help but twitch by what he saw. Janine stood up unsteadily from the floor. Her current situation was quite pitiable as blood flowed down her lips. Her hair was in disarray. The slight makeup she had on her was messed up as dust and sand had settled on her face. Her expression right now was ugly, borderline sinister. Most importantly, her shirt had been blasted into oblivion by David, but, to David's surprise, she wasn't naked as he expected. No, quite the opposite. Her inner vest was unharmed. David could see a slight silvery metallic substance fading back inside her body. He could guess a few things and came to a conclusion that it was what had protected her from the power of the threefold technique. If not, she would have at least ended up with a sunken stratum and a row of broken bones. David's heart uncontrollably clenched in apprehension. Oh, I won't fall before you do. You seem quite all right to me. So, you should be able to handle another round. David's expression was nonchalant as he made a motion for them to continue their combat. He rotated his blood to their limits. His heart beat wildly. Like the roar, an alternator. Blood surged. Like a river, as his physical body was strengthened to its limits. His muscles had bulged by quite a bit as he appeared taller by a few centimeters. 40 cycle per minute. The winds seemed to be stirred up by the pressure. His current expression was quite savage as he hated hatefully at her. She was the first person he had ever suffered a loss from. His hate toward her was growing by the second. Janine was so angry that she smiled sinisterly when she heard him. But as if she had remembered something, her gaze flickered with a strange light as she glared at him with hatred. It was likely he was angering her on purpose, making her intent on attacking him. She was currently weak, and although her physical strength without blood revolution was nothing to scoff at, judging by the pressure he was exuding, their powers were almost quite at the same level. If she forcefully roused her blood velocity, she would definitely injure her internal organs, which would in turn lead to at least 2 months of recuperation. She had assumed he was also the same, but from his stance, he was either putting on a facade or he was for real. She hesitated. She had been tricked once, and she wasn't willing to be tricked for the second time. She stared intently at him, wanting to figure him out. In the end, she gave an hateful glare that was enough to chill any heart down his way. Bastard, I will take that position from you by any means. You just wait and see. Stomping her foot in anger, she turned away, and with a few leaps, she had vanished from sight. Exactly 4 seconds later, cough, cough. David's body crumbled to the floor as he coughed out a mouthful of blood. He was incredibly weakened. He was just putting up a howl, hoping to scare her off. His internal organs were almost severely injured. Singlet of tears had appeared in several positions in his veins and blood vessels. They were on the verge of rupturing. But it wasn't worth mentioning, as he could just recuperate in the energy room for a few hours. He would be fine again. He was exceedingly lucky that she had chosen to leave when she had. If not, he would be no different than a chicken in a slaughterhouse. He suddenly smiled. That was a good fight. It was worth it. He had been hoping to spar with someone to see how strong he had become. Unexpectedly, he was given the chance to compare. Wiping off the blood and mouth, he limply left the place, the crowds of students, and the onlooking workers. Congrats on winning your first force duel. Your account will temporarily be protected from any force duel for a week, after which the protection would expire. Good luck. The cybernetic voice faded into thin air. What? Stunned, as he wasn't aware it was a force duel. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He was really tired as he walked through the familiar hallway that led to the energy room, walking into the large door. It's you. It's you. Two voices rang out simultaneously as David glanced at the figure behind the counter. Directly opposite the expensive chair and desk he had seen the old man sitting on previously. David's voice was quite casual and weak, while the other voice rang out in an accused tone. It was the blonde guy David had an argument with the last time he was in the energy room, and it appears that the other party also recognized him and also held a bit of a grudge against him. John stared at the rude junior before him with slight annoyance apparent in his tone. "Why are you here?" Increasingly annoyed, John spoke first. "To make use of the energy room, obviously." He rolled his eyes at the stupid question. Ignoring him, Davis made his way toward the pod that looked like a coffin. The piece of machine looked like the gaming capsules he had read from the fantasy-like web novels in his dream. No, not his dream, it was his previous life. It was a cryogenic pod. Its main purposes was to freeze the human's bodily activity. The body freezes, the heart slows down by a lot. The brain cells would also be slightly frozen. The reason for that is because for one to enter an energy tank, one would need to be in deep sleep, which could only be induced by the cryogenic pod. In the deep sleep state, one's body would temporarily forget to breathe. After a few moments of deep sleep, a mechanism in the cryogenic pod would be activated, transporting one's body directly into the energy tank. The fluid in the energy tank contains different kinds of elements, in which it includes oxygen, a massive amount of energy, mercury, protein, carbohydrates, etc. The oxygen element contained in the fluid was to provide the brain and body oxygen. The mercury is to aid the fluid in penetrating the body more easily. The massive amount of energy was to help strengthen, heal, and enhance the body. The element contains the crushed genetic nucleus of the rapidly evolved beings, mixed with special vials and concoction. The body was the main deciding factor in such cases, as it would readily absorb the fluid since it was beneficial to the body. There are levels to energy tanks on a normal circumstances. The first is the black-grade energy tank, which was especially meant for those who started on their own path to power.